In a desolate wasteland, Rick gets launched several feet across the floor during a fight, and he is seriously worried that he may die. Just then, his mentors emerge from the smoke, and rather than administer some first aid, they praise him for improving so much over the past 2 years of training, so he should have no problem with the E-rank adventurer exams now. And the praise is nice, but he still needs medical attention. Normally, the adventurers in this world are all young people due to all the strain that it would put on a person's body, but there are still some adults who never give up on their dreams, and that's why Rick is still trying to take the entrance exam. He walks up to the reception desk and asks for his exam ticket to be issued. But while the receptionist is confirming his details, she happens to recognize Rick and excitedly reminds him that used to know each other. Rick doesn't recognize her at first, but he soon recalls that he last saw her 2 years ago. They used to be co-workers, and she was really shocked when Rick resigned from his position out of nowhere, but even more so when she heard that he quit his job to become an adventurer. Rick is a little embarrassed since people in their 30s like him usually wouldn't apply to become adventurers. Normally, you'd start at G-rank in your teens and work your way up to E within a year or two. The receptionist asks what Rick has been up to these past 2 years since she hadn't heard from him at all. So Rick explains that he was pretty much cooped up in the mountains the entire time so that he could train with his mentors. Just then, the guild's usual drunkard walks up to the front desk and starts trying to flirt with the receptionist. But when she tries to decline because she is still obviously working, the guy doesn't take no for an answer, so he starts getting a little rough with the receptionist. And that's when Rick decides to step in, so he pulls the guy aside and lightly tabs his stomach with enough force to knock him out instantly. The receptionist apologizes for the inconvenience the drunk guy caused him, but Rick says it's fine since he used to work as a receptionist as well, and he still doesn't understand why the guild thinks it is a good idea to serve alcohol in here. After Rick receives his exam number, he heads outside where a maid named Renette greets him. She asks if Rick is done with his registration, and Rick confirms as much, thanking her for waiting for him. And while he says this, he is intently staring at Renette's huge jiggly puffs. She calls him out on this, so Rick tries to change the subject and talk about how excited he is for the exam. Back inside, the other adventurers are in shock at the handprint that was left on the drunk guy's armor, and that armor was made of dense steel, so whoever did this must be seriously strong. Just then, two guys walk in and recognize the drunk guy from a mugshot they saw a while back. His name is Domold, and he is an A-rank adventurer who's wanted for 30 counts of assault. The receptionist knows that Rick is the one who did this, but if he was really able to take out an A-rank adventurer, then he may be overqualified. In the meantime, Rick is getting a physical exam done, and its height is measured to be about 5'8", but the physician are surprised Rick is taking this test when he's already 32 years old. After that, all the examinees are led to the next room where they are instructed to place their hands on the crystal ball to measure their mana. They will glow depending on the level of mana a person possesses, so the others touch it, they get varying results with the highest being a C. But when it's Rick's turn, the orb barely lights up at all, so the examiner gives Rick an F on his mana exam. The other candidates begin mocking Rick for having such a low mana score as he leaves, but once the examiner calls for the next candidate to step up, the orb spontaneously shatters. The next test is one to measure the candidate's offensive abilities, so they are instructed to strike the green rod as hard as they can. It is a special slime bag that can absorb a lot of impacts, so they don't need to worry about damaging it. Rick remembers training with a slime bag once, and at the time, one of his mentors told him that he had to be able to destroy a golden slime bag with nothing but his fists. Rick didn't think that was possible since a golden slime bag is as hard as a dragon's fang, but his mentor told him that it was the least he had to do if he wanted to become an adventurer, and since his mentor was able to effortlessly destroy one with a single punch, Rick became motivated to train until it broke, even if he had to punch it 50,000 times a day. He hated that training, but back to the present, the candidates begin lining up in to strike the bag with all their might, and after the first guy has kicked it, the next candidate called up is the second son of the Dermute family, and it is rumored that his magic is as strong as a C-rank adventurer's despite only being 11 years old. As the boy begins, he casts a Hellflame spell, and everyone is surprised, including Rick. Although he's surprised because the spell is so tiny, the fireball is launched and hits the target, and the judges are actually impressed by the kid's output, so Rick is even more shocked since the fireballs his magic teacher would throw at him were far more deadly than what that kid just used. Naturally, Rick assumes the kid's fireball must have been just as powerful as his teacher's fireball, but maybe the kid shrunk it down so that it wouldn't destroy the building. As the attack power exam goes on, it eventually gets to Rick's turn, but as he is walking up to the slime bag, the examiner calls his attention and asks if he is really over 30 years old. Rick answers yes, so the examiner tells him that he is too old to be doing stuff like this. Training usually doesn't yield much of a result unless it is started very early on in life, and with how bad his mana exam score was, he should just quit before he makes a fool of himself. Rick knows people are judging him for being too old, and he really feels like giving up, but he has worked too hard to get to this point, punching slime bags until his knuckles were red with blood, and he still kept punching. All that pain has to count for something, so even if he is at a disadvantage for being old, he's going to give this everything he's got. Rick winds up his punch, and as he makes contact with the bag, it splatters everywhere and goes flying through the wall, leaving everyone shocked, including Rick's, since he wasn't expecting the bag to be so weak. The kid can't believe what he just witnessed, and he is frustrated by Rick's success, since this was supposed to be his stage to shine on, but he can accept losing to Rick for now since his specialty is really defensive magic, so he will make sure to outperform Rick on the next test. However, by the time they start the next test, the kid is left speechless as Rick has just tanked a 4th nature spell with ease. The examiner compliments Rick on being skilled enough to block his attacks, and Rick appreciates it, since he is doing his best. The instructor doesn't think Rick is actually giving it his all since he has just been using a first nature spell to defend himself so far, so he advises Rick to use a higher tier of defensive magic from now on. However, Rick informs him that he doesn't actually know how to use any other spells aside from first order ones, so he really is doing the best he can. The examiner can't believe Rick is actually only capable of using first order spells since he has such precise control over his mana, but Rick assures him that there won't be any problems since, from what he has seen so far, his first order spells should be more than enough to handle anything the examiner can throw at him. The examiner takes that as a personal insult, so he prepares to use a 5th order spell to show Rick that he shouldn't take someone like him lightly. As he casts the spell and unleashes a shock cyclone, a massive shockwave echoes through the kingdom, so far that even a knight on the other side of town could hear it. A few minutes later, Sylvester arrives at the exam center to figure out what's going on over here. He is informed that an F-rank adventurer managed to completely destroy a slime bag with his bare hands and perfectly block a 5th nature spell while only using basic defense magic. Sylvester thinks she must be playing a prank on him or something, but she is dead serious about everything she just told him. Right now, Rick is busy taking the written part of this exam, and he looks like he's confident in his knowledge for this one. After the test is over, Rick takes a break with Rionette, and she asks him how the written test went. Rick confidently answers that he is sure he will get 100% on the written test. After all, he spent 14 years working as a receptionist for the guild, so there's no way he could fail. However, he's still not sure his overall scores will be good enough to pass the exam. Rionette asks if Rick is worried about his practical exam scores, but he thinks he did pretty well in all the categories. However, he still got an F on his mana exam, so he's not sure how that will affect his chances of passing. Rionette assures Rick that he should be fine after all the training he did to prepare for this exam, but moments later, the kid from earlier comes up to Rick and screams at him for doing too well on the tests. Rick doesn't know what this is about, so he assumes Freed must have gotten lost or something, so he offers to help him. Freed is upset because this was supposed to be the day he showed off his exceptional skills to all the peasants, but Rick went and outperformed him, so he's crying about it now. Rick tries to tell Freed that he didn't intend to steal his spotlight, but Freed's sister has already arrived, and after seeing her little brother crying, she immediately starts yelling at Rick. Rick asks if she is related to Freed by any chance, so she introduces herself as Angelica Diremute, and Freed wastes no time in telling her that this 40-year-old man ruined his day. Rick is offended and says he is only 30, but Angelica and Freed keep calling him a 40-year-old man. Eventually, Angelica throws her glove at Rick to challenge him to a duel, and Rick doesn't realize that it's a challenge, so he picks up the glove because he doesn't want it to get stained. Unfortunately, as per noble customs, picking up that glove is a declaration of intent to throw hands, so Angelica happily sets a venue for them to begin the fight. She says she is going to take great pleasure in punishing Rick for the crime of making her brother cry, but if they are going to do this, then they have to play by the rules. Duels in the Fylheim Kingdom allows the winner to set a penalty for the loser if they win, so she sets a penalty stating that the loser will have to serve the winner for the rest of their life. Angelica is apparently a second-class royal knight, but Rick doesn't know how strong a second-class knight is supposed to be, so Rionette gives him some context and explains that a second-class knight would be around B rank. Rick starts freaking out because he knows B rank adventurers are able to take out huge monsters on their own, but Rionette doesn't think it's a big deal and asks Rick to hold back so he doesn't end up killing her. Rick can't imagine holding back against someone at B rank while he is still F rank, since he still has no context for how strong he truly is, so Rionette tells him to just have faith in all the training he has done for the last 2 years. All of a sudden, all the traumatic training montages he had to go through come flooding into his mind, so he ends up throwing up. Rick curses Rionette for making him relive such torture. But she reminds him that if he was able to survive all that, then he shouldn't have a problem handling Angelica. After all, he's a member of the strongest party on the continent, so he should have a little more faith in himself. Rick realizes that she's right, so he gets up to face Angelica with no fear. He is still not sure how well his current level of strength will hold up against a second-class knight, but there's no use worrying about it now. Angelica is confident that she is much stronger than Rick, so she promises to hold back against him so that he doesn't die, and then begins charging up her attack. She then uses Blink Step to dash past Rick, just to show him how fast she is. Her speed has earned her the title of Lightspeed Angelica, and Rick is definitely surprised, but not for the reason she thinks. Angelica says she will now finish him off with her next attack, so she uses Blink Step again. But as she's approaching Rick, he can't believe what he's seeing because Angelica is moving so slow. The power scales must have been high on copium if they thought she was worthy of the Lightspeed title, because she is moving slower than his normal running speed. Rick easily dodges her strike, and Angelica can't believe it since it should be impossible for an F-rank adventurer to keep up with her speed. In fact, only first-class knights have ever managed to react to her speed, so she rationalizes it by saying Rick just got lucky, but she won't let it happen again. She uses Blink Step once more, but in Rick's eyes, she is still moving really slow, so he wonders how she could have possibly made it to B rank like this. He is starting to realize that he may actually be pretty strong, but just as he is getting ready to dodge Angelica's attack, she trips on a rock and briefly unlocks the vertical B-blade attack. Rick can't predict any of the strikes, so he is having trouble dodging, and by the time Angelica finally stops herself, he no longer thinks he can call himself strong because he was completely unprepared for that attack. However, neither was Angelica because she didn't plan any of that. She tries to play it cool and tells Rick she's impressed that he managed to dodge her last attack because she totally meant to do that, but that just means she will have to go even faster to overwhelm him. She uses her special technique, which allows her to move 3 times faster than normal. But even though she is 3 times faster, she is still pretty slow to Rick. However, he chooses not to attack carelessly since he doesn't know what kind of tricks she might have up her sleeve, so he dodges instead, and Angelica is left flabbergasted that Rick can still keep up with her. She can only use that technique 2 more times before she runs out of energy, so she gives it everything she has and goes for one last desperate attack. However, she trips once more, so Rick tries to intercept her with a punch and ends up blowing a hole in the ground. Angelica realizes that she would have died from a punch like that if it had connected, so she is terrified of Rick and questions who he really is. Rick just says he is a former receptionist turned adventurer. He is eager to continue his fight with Angelica, so he climbs out of the hole to face her again, but Angelica immediately surrenders so she doesn't end up getting killed. Rick doesn't understand why she is giving up, but her surrendering makes him the winner, and as per the penalty Angelica set, she now has to serve him for the rest of her life. Angelica had forgotten all about that penalty, so she does the only thing she can think to do and runs away. Rick doesn't really care about the bet, so he doesn't chase after her, and the results of the exam will be coming out soon, so he needs to go back to check if he passed. This is when Reinette tells Rick that the rest of his mentors will be coming to check on him, and Rick starts freaking out because their presence always spells trouble. Rick and Reinette head back to the exam center for now, and they are told that the results will soon be announced through their exam tickets. If you pass, your ticket will glow blue and you will be allowed to move on to the second stage of the exams, but anything else would mean the candidate has failed. Rick is really worried that he might have failed the exam, so Reinette tries to reassure him that he did well on the exam. Rick thinks Reinette is nice for trying to make him feel better, and if he were 10 years younger, he would totally marry her. But she also has her scary side as she threatens to triple his training if he somehow managed to fail. Just then, Rick's card begins to glow, so he picks it up in anticipation, and he is elated to discover that he has successfully passed the first exam. He leaves the hall with Reinette, but as he steps outside, a dreadful stench fills his nostrils. He looks over and sees this rich dude walking straight up to Reinette, and he immediately introduces himself as the eldest son of the Diremute family, Raster Diremute. Rick has had to deal with 2 Diremute family members already, but this time Raster isn't here for Rick, he's here to shoot his shot with Reinette. Rick tries to introduce himself to Raster, but Raster wants nothing to do with a muscular middle-aged man, so he goes back to talking to Reinette and tells her that he is deeply in love with her jugs. Sorry, he meant to say personality, and wants Reinette to come with him so that she can become his second wife. This is where Rick draws the line since he can't lose Reinette to someone like Raster, so he steps in front of Reinette and says she is his girlfriend, so Raster has no right to shoot his shot anymore. Raster looks down and notices that Rick is holding an exam card, which means he must still be F rank, and he finds it hilarious that someone as old as Rick is still at the lowest rank. Rick tries to defend himself by saying Raster is a little too old to be taking the exam as well since he looks like he's at least 25, but Raster just laughs and tells Rick that he isn't here as an examinee. He already passed this test back when he was 14, so he's actually an A-rank adventurer, and he is here as an instructor for the second part of the exam. Believing he has asserted dominance over Rick, Raster turns back to Rionette and asks her if she would like to join him for dinner, but Rionette shuts him down and says the only man she'll go with is Rick, especially with the ungodly amount of perfume Raster sprayed on himself. Raster is enraged and can't accept that he won't be getting Rionette to go with him, so he swears that if he ends up in charge of Rick's exam, that he will make sure Rick suffers as much as possible. And that definitely going to make Rionette love him instead totally. After Raster walks off, Rick prays that he doesn't have to deal with him during the exam, but then he notices that Rionette is still clinging on to him, so he jumps back in embarrassment. He apologizes to Rionette for calling her his girlfriend all of a sudden, but Rionette says he doesn't need to be sorry about it since he did it to get rid of Raster, and it made her really happy. Meanwhile, Raster's stewing in rage because he couldn't get Rionette to be his second wife, and he lost her to a middle-aged man at that. Just then, his two siblings come running up to him and Fried says an old man was messing with him during the exam, while Angelica complains that the same old man beat her in a duel and wanted to make her his servant, even though she is the one who made the bet to begin with. The way they say it makes it sound like they didn't do anything wrong, so Raster is outraged that someone would dare to humiliate his family like this, but when he learns that the one who did this is Rick, he gets a wicked grin on his face because he now has an excuse to get payback. A while later, the mock battles are about to begin, and Rick is really nervous about it. Rionette asks him to make sure he holds back during the exam, but Rick still believes he is weak, so he doesn't understand why he would have to hold back against people who should be stronger than him. And he still has to worry about Raster since it would be terrible if he was the one in charge of his test. Just then, Rick and Rionette bump into a man named Lynx, and he says he will be the one in charge of Rick's exam, and Rick instantly begins celebrating because that's one more thing he doesn't have to worry about. Lynx goes on to say that he is surprised that Rick would want to switch jobs to an adventurer at his age, but it's not like he is saying it's a bad thing. In fact, he believes it is inspiring that Rick still has the determination to work toward his dreams, and he can relate since they are similar in age. Lynx became an adventurer back when he was 24, but in the 20 years since then, he has only been able to achieve B rank. But if he wants to accomplish his goals, he would need to get to A rank. Seeing Rick work so hard has motivated him to do his best as well, and he is excited to test Rick in the upcoming mock battle, but he won't be going easy on him. However, around the corner, we see Raster lurking with devious activity on his mind. As Rick and Lynx part ways, Lynx walks down the dark stairwell, and out of nowhere, Raster shows up behind him with a proposal which doubles as a threat. At the same time, Rick and Rionette are waiting in the locker room, and Rick seems to be in a much better mood than he was earlier, and it's all because he got Lynx as his instructor. However, a moment later, someone comes in to announce that Lynx has mysteriously fallen ill, so he won't be able to act as an instructor anymore. In his place, Raster has been assigned to take over Rick's exam, and Rick starts freaking out. Rionette mentions that Raster must have pulled some illegal strings to get this to happen, and since he is related to Angelica and Fried, he may be holding a grudge against Rick. The other examinees in the room begin talking about how terrible it is to have Raster as your instructor for the exam, and while he may be a dignified member of the Daremute family, he is also known for how much he enjoys beating up F-rank adventurers. Every single year, he picks a particular adventurer to mess with and does everything in his power to make them fail, which is bad news for Rick since Raster definitely hates his guts right now. Later, as Raster is outside tormenting a random examinee, he fires a barrage of ice blasts and knocks the guy out. But just as he was insulting the examinee for being weak, his fun gets interrupted as he receives a message from the elite guard. Meanwhile, Rick is pacing around inside as it is soon going to be his turn and he doesn't know how he is going to handle Raster. Rionette doesn't understand what Rick is so worried about since he just needs to beat Raster. However, Rick thinks beating Raster is impossible since he is a respected A-rank adventurer, while Rick is only F-rank. He believes he will die if he faces Raster, but if he backs out, he will have to do 3 times his normal training. Rionette gets in front of Rick and asks him if he really isn't confident in his skills. He sincerely believes that he is an inadequate adventurer since he switched to this job too late in life and everyone always tells him that he is too old to do it. But Rionette tells him that he shouldn't let what other people think shake his confidence because all that matters is that she believes in him. Even if Rick can't believe in himself, she wants him to trust her judgment when she says he can win. Rick thanks her for her kind words and says he is feeling much more confident now. Just then, a cloaked boy approaches Rick and offers him a free fortune-telling. He explicitly says there's nothing shady going on here, so despite this whole thing being really suspicious, Rick decides to go along with it. However, just as Rick is about to sit down, Rionette notices a magic circle on the chair, so she tries to warn Rick that it's a trap, but she ends up being too late as Rick is teleported away in an instant. After that, the boy removes his cloak and reveals that he is actually freed, and he is quite pleased with himself for being able to trick Rick into falling for his trap. However, he should have thought of a plan to teleport himself away as well, since Reinette is severely pissed and blows a hole through the wall while holding him by the collar. She asks Freed where Rick has been teleported to, and Freed refuses to tell her initially. But after a non-consensual eyelash trim and the threat of some eye poking, Freed tells her that his teleportation magic can only send someone 100 meters away at most, so Rick is still nearby. Meanwhile, Rick has just appeared on the river behind the training center, and he is really confused about how he got here in the first place. Just then, the elite guard shows up and Rick is told that unfortunately, they have orders to beat him up. They are the elite guard of the Diarmid family, so Rick realizes that Raster and the others must be behind this. They don't want Raster to get his hands dirty, so they'll make it so that Rick won't be able to participate in the exam. Rick calls them shameless for trying to stall him so he misses his exam, but the leader corrects him and says this is a coordinated jumping. Among the elite guard, they have B and A rank adventurers, so Rick feels like he is utterly outmatched. As he is contemplating what to do, he notices some people standing on the ledge nearby, and upon taking a closer look, he realizes that they are the senior members of his party, and they scare him more than the elite guard. His party members jump down to ask Rick why he is here when he has an exam to get to, so fearing for the lives of the elite guard, he makes up a lie that they were just trying to help him get ready. Rostin offers to join them if they are doing training, but Rick knows how hellish training with Broston is, so he tries to warn the leader of the elite guard to get everyone to leave before they get themselves killed. The leader doesn't take him seriously and tells his team to kill Broston, but as one of them tries to slash Broston on the head, the sword shatters to pieces, and Broston is just standing there stone-faced. He commends the guy for strengthening his body well, but he is disappointed that he failed to strengthen his weapon enough so that it wouldn't break. The guy gets angry and decides to use his fists instead, but that goes about as well as you would expect since Broston just grabs his hand and squishes it until it turns purple. However, Broston tells him that he doesn't need to worry since he has healing magic to restore his mangled hand to normal. The leader of the elite guard is starting to realize that he might have screwed up by attacking these guys and finally seems to be grasping how powerful they truly are. While all this is going on, Nezette asks Rick if the elite guard are really here to pick a fight with him. Rick confirms it, so Nezette says he will handle it for him in a peaceful manner. He then proceeds to pull out his Super Fire Barrel Mk3 rifle and fires at all the people within range, leaving them limp on the ground. Rick yells at him for killing everyone when he said he would resolve this peacefully, but Nezette asserts that none of them are dead yet, probably. One guy tries to take Alice as a hostage to gain the upper hand, but he has no idea just how badly he just messed up. Even Broston tells him that he had better back away from her slowly if he doesn't want to die, but the guy doesn't listen and hits Alice to get her to shut up, and his fate was sealed once he did that because Alice proceeds to vaporize him. The other members of the elite guard can't believe what just happened, but the leader has figured out exactly what's going on, so he tells them that the vampire girl is a prodigy who is the world's strongest mage despite only being 10 years old. Alistair Drackle. Mizet is a dwarf who is so skilled that he can make technology no one has ever seen before, and Broston is an orc with incredible strength and wisdom. They are all S-rank adventurers, meaning they possess strength beyond common sense, and on top of that, they are part of a party which consists entirely of S-rank adventurers or Chalcom Fist. The leader never thought he would get to see such powerful people in person, so now that he has, he decides to do the smart thing and retire from the elite guard effective immediately. However, the rest of the guys who didn't quit ended up having to deal with Alice, so Rick just tries to ignore all the screams of pain and focus on his exam. Rick makes it back to Reinette after she has dealt with Freed, and they soon find Lynx, who has been badly beaten. Earlier, Raster cornered Lynx and asked him what his dream was, and when Lynx answered that he wanted to build a school for the kids back in his village, Raster said screw those kids and beat Lynx up for daring to have a dream. Raster did this so that he could get to Rick, and Rick is insanely pissed about it. So while he was scared before, he now has nothing but determination to beat Raster's ass. But before that, this is Adolf, and he's going to tell us about the 4 cores of power in this world. They are strength, dexterity, magic capacity, and magic control. And it just so happens that Adolf was born with a special ability to tell exactly how much power a person possesses by looking at them. To demonstrate, he looks at a random examinee and sees that the guy is a total weakling, so expectedly he gets taken out by Raster immediately. On the other hand, Raster is a powerhouse with most of his stats going into mana capacity, so it hurts a little for Adolf to look at him since scanning strong people strains his eyes. As a result, when he took a look at Rick, he straight up went blind. Meanwhile, in the stands, Rick's former co-worker goes up to Rionette and introduces herself as Elisa Granger and says she had seen Rick with Rionette the day before, so when Rionette tells her that she's part of Rick's party, Elisa is overjoyed to hear that Rick has new friends, and since everyone was getting ready to watch Rick's test, Rionette invites Elisa to join them. She happily agrees and walks over to the seats, but she is shocked by Brosnan being here since he's an orc. Mizette invites Rionette to sit next to him, but she politely declines since Mizette is guaranteed to harass her if she sits anywhere near him. Just then, Mizette notices the girl standing behind Rionette and asks who she is, so Rionette introduces her as Rick's former co-worker and Elisa greets them all. Mizette notices the huge personality Elisa has, so he eagerly offers her the seat next to him, but Rionette isn't going to let Elisa fall victim to Mizette's perverted intentions. Just then, Rick steps out into the arena, so Brosnan asks Rionette how she thinks Rick will do in the exam. She confidently says Rick will pass the exam without incident, but Elisa doesn't think it'll be that easy. She says Raster is an A-rank adventurer, and he is known for using excessive force to beat down the E-rank adventurers, but if Raster is just A-rank, then Brosnan is sure Rick won't have any trouble. As the fight is about to begin, Angelica and a badly injured Freed cheer for Raster to teach Rick a lesson, and Raster intends to. He doesn't know how Rick managed to escape the guys who were meant to beat him up, but they are nowhere near as strong as him. Rick asks Raster why he became an adventurer, and Raster answers that he just did it for the status since so long as he has a high rank, he gets to beat up rookies for fun. He doesn't actually have to put himself in any danger, and he can show his adventurer card anytime someone questions his authority. If his reasons are truly so shallow, then Rick says he refuses to lose to him no matter what. Raster begins by firing a level 1 ice spell at Rick, and he intentionally misses, but Rick didn't move an inch. He mocks Rick for being frozen in fear, but the real reason Rick is standing still is because Rionette had advised him to use the first minute of the battle to calm himself and observe Raster's movements. Raster is getting ready to attack Rick for real this time, so he casts a level 3 fire spell at Rick, and Rick is impressed by Raster casting such a spell so quickly, but he has to keep observing so he can't dodge it. The fire blast hits Rick head-on, and while Elisa is really worried about him, Rick turns out to be perfectly fine. Brosnan tells Elisa that Rick is strong enough that a blast like that has no chance of damaging him. He explains that of the 4 cores of power, mana capacity must be trained from an early age, otherwise one loses all hope of growing in that category. It usually has a limit of about 20, so since Rick became an adventurer at the age of 30, his mana capacity is really low, which is why he puts so much effort into training the other areas. Brosnan trained him in physical strength and had Rick do things like running between villages, but with giant 100-kilogram ankle weights attached and venomous snakes that chased him through the forest. Brosnan did everything he could to build up Rick's strength, and Mizette trained him in mana control, and it's honestly surprising that Mizette didn't give up on teaching halfway through since he never liked working. But when it came to Rick, he wanted to make sure that Rick could put up some good magical defenses, otherwise he would have been a pile of ash by now. He also says Rionette was the one who trained Rick in dexterity, and this comes as a shock to Elisa since she thought Rionette was a maid, but Rionette just enjoys wearing maid outfits for fun. Rick put everything he has into learning from them, so he already possesses the power of an S-rank adventurer, although he doesn't realize it since Brosnan kept gaslighting him into thinking F-rank adventurers were much stronger than him. As Raster is about to cast another spell, he begins insulting Rick and Lynx for being too old to stick around in the adventurer business. And as he says this, he throws every elemental attack in his skill tree at Rick. By the time he's done, he believes Rick must be dead or at least severely injured, but to his and his siblings' horror, Rick survived all of that without a single scratch. Raster is starting to get annoyed by how resilient Rick is, so he decides that he will finish Rick off with his bare hands. He casts a strengthening spell on his hands and feet before rushing in to attack Rick, but as he throws a punch, Rick counters with a punch of his own and blows Raster back. Rionette's advice really paid off since Rick has watched Raster for long enough that he now sees the truth. While Raster does have a larger mana capacity than him, that's all he has. He never took the time or effort to truly refine his powers, so he has the potential to be stronger than Rick. But as of this moment, Rick understands that he is stronger than Raster. Raster tries to pass off Rick's successful counterpunch as a fluke, so he's going to get serious and cast a full incantation spell to take Rick out. But while his spell looked pretty impressive, Rick was able to block it with one hand and even insults Raster for his sloppy spell execution. Elisa doesn't understand how Rick could possibly block a spell of that level with his low mana capacity. So Mizette explains that Rick learned to have great control over his mana use, so even though Raster has more mana, Rick can use 100,000 times less mana to match Raster's spell casting. Raster's confidence is starting to falter, so he tries one last attack to prove that he's stronger, but Rick is far too fast for him and delivers a punch that forces Raster to use Iron Body defense magic. By this point, Raster has realized that Rick possesses far more power than the average E rank, but he still claims that he has just been getting lucky with his attacks up to this point. But Rick isn't falling for any more gaslighting. He knows that everything up till now has been a result of his strength, and on top of that, Rick didn't even use any strengthening magic, yet he was able to overpower Raster after he used it to attack. Raster realizes he can't bluff his way out of this, so he asks Rick how he managed to become so strong when he possesses very little mana, but Rick feels insulted that Raster thinks he used some cheap trick. He was thrown into a dragon's lair and wasn't allowed to leave until he defeated it. He got blasted over and over with extremely powerful explosions, and then he was forced to swim through a swamp of monster goo until he choked on it. Elisa can't believe Rick survived all that, but in reality, Rick didn't survive, but since Broston's healing magic is so powerful, as long as it was applied quickly, no matter how many times Rick ended up dying, they always brought him back to life. That's how he managed to exceed his physical limitations. And it is honestly surprising how well Rick handled it, since none of them had any regard for his safety, so if Mazette lushed him off a cliff for training and he died, they just called Broston to heal him. The same thing happened with Alice's training and Rionette's training, leading to several life-ending injuries. Raster doesn't believe any of it, though, since even if there was a way for Rick to train like that, what reason would he have to willingly put himself through hell like that? Rick says he has a dream of eventually killing the world's strongest monster, Kaiser Alcippide. Raster begins laughing at Rick because he thinks the monster is nothing more than an old story, but in truth, the monster is very real, and the main goal of the Orichalcum party is to one day eliminate it. Raster doesn't believe the monster exists and calls Rick dumb for believing in a children's story, but Rick doesn't care if Raster doesn't believe him, since his mission has nothing to do with him. Raster is tired of listening to Rick's stories, so he says he will now end this fight once and for all and uses a level 7 binding spell to hold Rick in place. He then begins the chant for the strongest spell he has available, the level 8 Yggdrasil Vine Mech. With this, Raster believes the fight has been won, since there's no way Rick would be able to overpower a spell this powerful. However, Rick begins charging up a level 1 air shot to fight back. Raster laughs at him and says a mere level 1 spell could never beat his level 8 spell. Yet Rick is still completely confident that his air shot will be enough to punch through Raster's Vine Mech, and that's because Raster has used this spell a handful of times at most, so he hasn't refined it to its utmost capabilities. On the other hand, Rick has used his air shot over 100 million times already, so he has learned how to unleash its full potential. No one believes Rick's claim of using the spell 100 million times, since it is physically impossible to have done that in only 2 years, but Broston assures Elisa that Rick is telling the truth, although he needed space-time magic to make it possible. Raster still doesn't believe it though, so he gets ready to smash Rick into the ground and finish this. But as he gets ready to punch, Rick effortlessly snaps the binds on his arms and legs and clashes with Raster. Raster is certain that he has won now that he has landed his attack, but then his mech started crumbling from Rick's power, before finally being shattered to pieces and sending Raster flying off into the stands, and he is still alive, but his pride definitely isn't. Hardly anyone can believe what they just saw, as an F-rank adventurer just defeated an A-rank, although Rick's friends totally expected this outcome. After Rick returns to the locker room, the other go to meet him and congratulate him on winning his fight, especially Elisa, who is really impressed by how strong he has gotten. Rick finally understands that he is really strong, and he doesn't know why he didn't realize it sooner, but he thanks his friends for training him so well. They tell them there's no need to thank them so formally, and instead they should all go out to celebrate at a bar. But before that, Rick hears the voices of Raster and his siblings entering the room, and Raster is clearly feeling the pain from Rick's punch, but he refuses to get treated for it. As Rick sees him, he starts telling Raster that there's a reason he lost the match today. Raster doesn't want to hear any mockery from Rick, but Rick is trying to give him some genuine advice, so he tells Raster that while he was training, he limited the number of techniques he would use in order to master them fully, so if Raster wishes to grow stronger, he should refine a single technique until he tells like he's going to die, but he doesn't have to follow the advice if he doesn't want to. Rick says he has high hopes for Raster's future as an adventurer, and it looks like Raster has finally learned some humility, since he silently walks past Rick and tells him that when the time comes for Rick's next promotion exam, Raster will make sure he is strong enough so that he doesn't lose a second time. Raster then leaves and his siblings follow after him, but before leaving, Angelica lowers her head to apologize for all the trouble she caused Rick, and then she helps Raster walk out. After that, the E-rank exams have officially concluded, so an announcement is made for the candidates who passed. As the numbers are called, Rick eagerly waits to hear his own, and meanwhile, the others have already started a preemptive celebratory feast for him since they are sure there's no way he will fail. Rick ends up passing his exam, but he seems a lot more calm about it than Rinette expected, and it's because he has a lot of stuff to think about. Rick recalls a time in his childhood when he read a book about a hero fighting the ultimate monster, Kaiser Alcipete, in order to obtain the Akashic Records, but ultimately, that hero failed to defeat it, so he left the Akashic Records to be found by future generations of adventurers. This was the moment Rick first decided that he wanted to become an adventurer just like the one in his storybook, but his mother wasn't too keen on him becoming an adventurer since the job is pretty dangerous, so she nicely tells Rick that she would be more at ease if he chose a different career. However, Rick's father was much less nice about it and told Rick that he should get a real job before throwing his life away as an adventurer. One day after a checkup, Rick was congratulated by his physician who tells him that he possessed an innate skill. Rick is in disbelief because innate skill is an insanely rare attribute which makes him pretty similar to Yamato the hero, but the doctor reminded him that innate skills aren't things that can be awoken through hard work, so it's going to take some time before he is able to use his ability. However, Rick was still every bit as happy as could be since this brought him one step closer to being able to declare himself as a successful adventurer to his parents. The next day, Rick wakes up and tells his friends that he's got an innate, and when he's finally able to use it, it's going to be amazing. However, days soon turned to weeks, weeks to months, and eventually, Rick had to come to terms with the fact that his innate skill would never manifest. His friends were sympathetic with him and encouraged Rick to try becoming an adventurer anyway, since most adventurers don't have innate abilities anyway. Plus, adventurers make a ton of money, so it's not a bad job. However, the reason Rick wanted to become an adventurer wasn't for the money, but to become like the hero Yamato. So since he can't become the kind of adventurer he was hoping to be, he decides to go get a real job after all. Rick tells his parents about his decision, and they are overjoyed to hear that Rick has finally given up on his dreams and is ready to get a soul-crushing job like a normal person. The next few years went by with Rick learning the ropes of the receptionist job and watching countless adventurers all living out his dream, so as time went on, Rick became more and more jaded to reality until finally he grew to accept his mediocre life and enjoy the time he spent with his friends and family. One day, while looking through his old books, he finds that storybook of Yamato's legendary adventures, but by now it's nothing more than an old fairy tale he used to believe in. Rick heads into work the next day, and Elisa had just been hired at the time, so she was struggling to keep up with all the paperwork. Rick came over to help her out a bit and reminded her that there was no need to rush the learning process, since she'll get the hang of it sooner or later. There's also one more thing he wants to tell her, since from what he has seen around town, monsters are becoming more active, so a quest will likely pop up soon to subjugate them. Elisa is thankful for the heads up since she can now get the forms ready ahead of time. As Elisa leaves to go get the paperwork done, an adventurer Rick is friends with walks in, and he's got something to show Rick. He just got back from his promotion exam, and he is proud to say that he is officially a B-rank adventurer from this day onwards. Rick is happy for his friend, but he would be lying if he said he wasn't jealous seeing someone get to live out his dream of becoming an adventurer. To deal with the jealousy, Rick does what any responsible adult would do and drinks late into the night to make the pain go away. But even with his drunken state, the difference between himself and Zaid are crystal clear. Zaid has been promoted all the way up to B rank and is living Rick's life, while Rick has sat in the same chair for 14 years at this point, and he has nothing to show for it other than a stable income and a few yearly pay raises. It's not like he thinks he wasted his life, but he can't help but wonder how far he could have come if he chose to become an adventurer, after all back then. Just then, Rick hears a commotion in the middle of town, and he goes to check it out and see if he can help. However, what he sees horrifies him since, for whatever reason, there's a mid-rank hand troll in the city. Under normal circumstances, as soon as Rick saw that thing, he would have run away, but he notices a woman walks right into the path of the troll, and he can't just stand by while someone gets hurt, so runs out in front of the woman to try and protect her from the troll, even if he can't really do much to hold it back. As the monster closes in on them, Rick braces himself for a gruesome death, but before that could happen, Rinette walks out in front of Rick and slashes the monster to pieces. She then tells Rick that she appreciates him trying to protect her, but there's no need to be concerned for her safety, since she is a skilled adventurer. After that, Rick and Rinette walk together and introduce themselves to one another, after which Rick says he was really impressed with how strong Rinette was back there, so he asks her if she happens to be a B-rank adventurer. Rinette says she's not B-rank, so Rick assumes she must be A-rank, and he is amazed since it's a rare occasion to meet an A-rank adventurer out in town, but Rinette corrects him once more and says she's not an A-rank either. She then pulls out her S-rank badge to prove her rank to Rick, and the shock Rick feels is immeasurable. S-rank adventurers are so powerful and rare that this is his first time meeting one. In fact, there are rumors that HQ intentionally takes them out of the local guild registers and oversees their missions directly. He can't believe he gets to meet such a legendary adventurer, but since she's here, he says he has a weird question to ask. So he pleads with Reinette not to laugh at him. Reinette assures him that she hasn't laughed even once in the 9 years after her 8th birthday, but Rick isn't sure if she should be proud of that. Moving on, Rick tells Reinette about the dream he had when he was younger to become an adventurer and eventually defeat Kaiser Alcipiat, so he wants to know if she thinks he could still achieve his dream if he tried becoming an adventurer today, even though he's already 30. After seeing how Rick acted when he thought she was in danger, she is sure that he possesses the courage necessary to become an adventurer. But Rick must be aware of the importance of mana reserves to adventurers. Rick says he is aware that mana reserves are hard to develop unless it is done during your youth, but difficult is an understatement as Reinette believes it is practically impossible to build your mana reserves once you grow older. Considering the importance of mana reserves to adventuring, Reinette has to be honest with him and says she doesn't think Rick could make it as an adventurer if he started as he is now. Rick was already expecting an answer like that, but it still hurts to hear. At the very least, he finds closure in the fact that it was an S-rank adventurer who broke the news to him, so there's nothing left to do but give up on his dreams and settle into his ordinary life. Reinette apologizes if she made Rick feel bad, but he says it's fine since he appreciates her honesty. Plus, it's not every day he gets to meet a lady as pretty as her, so he even invites her to grab a meal with him sometime. Although he was only joking, Reinette immediately agrees to his dinner invitation and offers to meet him tomorrow for their date. The next day, Rick is in a really good mood, so he wants to work even harder than usual today. Even when Zeta comes in and brags about his new B-rank status, Rick doesn't show even a hint of jealousy and wishes him luck on his next quest. By the end of the day, Rick is happily skipping down the road to meet up with Reinette, and he is slightly hoping that they could start dating if things end up going well on their date. But then he hears people screaming that monsters are attacking, so unfortunately, his date plans are ruined. Since Reinette was supposed to meet him nearby, Rick assumes she must already be fighting the monsters, so he rushes to check on her, although she seems to be doing alright on her own. There are a lot of monsters approaching, so Reinette asks Rick to stand back while she handles this and he lets her do her things. Moments later, the battlefield is covered with hundreds of monster chunks and Reinette looks like she's barely even warmed up, but all of a sudden, she senses something that gives her flashbacks to the death of everyone she loved, and the trauma makes her fall to her knees. A monster happens to show up right as Reinette is having a panic attack and Rick isn't equipped to defend her, but luckily, Zaid steps in at the last second and saves them both. Rick is thankful, but he also doesn't know why Zaid is here in the first place. Just then, 2 other adventurers show up to help as well, and Zaid tells Rick that the guild put out an emergency quest to subjugate these monsters, so they all rushed over to help. And since they are here now, Rick should hurry up and get his date to safety while they handle the rest of the monsters. While the adventurers are fighting the monsters, Rick realizes that he is still as jealous of them as he has always been. After Reinette regains some of her composure, she warns Rick that it's dangerous for him to be here. Rick tries to reassure her that the B-rank adventurers will be able to handle the rest of the monsters, but Reinette says they won't be strong enough to handle what's coming. She tells Rick that there's a dragon nearby and she won't be able to fight it due to years of unaddressed trauma that causes her to lose control of the magic within her body whenever she senses a dragon. Rick doesn't believe a dragon would appear all the way out here, but in the next moment, something flies overhead, and as Rick looks up, he spots the dragon Reinette was talking about. It makes no sense for a dragon to show up in a human town. According to the guild's recommendations, if an adventurer lower than A rank ends up encountering a dragon, the only thing they can do is stand still and pray that the dragon leaves on its own. And no matter what, no one should attack the dragon first, but the magician gets scared and does exactly what the rules said not to do, leading to the entire B-rank group getting decimated. There's no way any of them can fight the dragon, so Zaid tells everyone to make a run for it, but as they try to escape, they find themselves trapped in a barrier the dragon put up. It looks like the dragon doesn't intend to let any of them here alive, and they stand no chance against it, but Rick begins walking straight up to the dragon. Zaid tells him to stop since there's nothing he can do to the dragon as a receptionist, but the way Rick sees it, if he's going to die anyway, he might as well face death head-on and die as an adventurer would. Rick thought he would feel better if he gave up on his dream of being an adventurer, but he still feels the fire inside pushing him to work towards that goal. He picks up a rock and throws it at the dragon, and it does absolutely nothing, but Rick's bravery motivates the other adventurers to try their best as well, even if they know they'll lose in the end. They all begin throwing every attack they have at the dragon, but it doesn't do much other than provoke the dragon into using its fire breath. Zaid realizes this is probably going to be bad, so he uses his iron body skill to protect everyone, and while it allows them to survive, they still suffer a considerable amount of damage from it. But from the flaming rubble, Rick gets up and walks straight over to the dragon, claiming that he will make his dream come true no matter what it takes. The dragon uses its foot to squish Rick, but on the verge of death, Rick's dormant innate skill awakens, giving him the power necessary to survive being stepped on and push the dragon away with ease. The amount of magic flowing from his body is so potent that it is actually visible, and Rick realizes that this must be his innate skill. So while he wishes it awakened earlier, it's better late than never. Now that he has the power necessary to fight back, Rick is a lot more confident about facing the dragon. So as it fires another blast at him, he stretches his hand out and blocks the fire with his magical energy. And when he finally gets the chance to counterattack, Rick unleashes a punch that carves a hole straight through the dragon's body, killing it in an instant. Once it's all over, Rick goes back to normal and collapses to the ground, and by the time he wakes up, he's in a hospital bed and in great physical pain. Renet is there as well and informs Rick that he overloaded every single magic circuit in his body during the fight with the dragon, so by all accounts, he should already be dead. He's been unconscious for about a week, and the entire time Renet has been waiting by his bedside because she wants to personally invite Rick to join the party she's a part of Orichalcum Fist. The party's goal is to defeat Kaiser Alcipiat just like Rick, and after seeing Rick fight on courage alone, even when he didn't have the power to win, gives her the confidence to say that Rick can grow stronger and fight alongside the S-Rank party and become an adventurer. This was the first time anyone ever supported the idea of Rick becoming an adventurer, so he is moved to tears by Renet's faith in him. That leads us back to the present where Rick has just officially passed his E-Rank exam, so for the first time in his life he can say that he is an adventurer. After Rick's exam results were announced, he was to pay a visit to Lynx, who is currently recovering in the hospital. He congratulates Rick on passing the exam and asks if he is still willing to go get those drinks they had talked about earlier. Rick is happy to hang out with Lynx, but as soon as Lynx mentions wanting to come to visit Rick at home, Rick's face contorts like never before. He tries to convince Lynx, but since Lynx was so insistent, Rick gave him some directions and told him to wear his strongest set of armor if he wanted to survive. At first, Lynx didn't understand why Rick was making such a fuss about someone coming over, but as he arrives at the address he was given, he realizes that Rick literally lives in a demon lord's castle. As he gets to the front door, he rings the bell and Rick comes out to meet him. The inside of the castle is a lot nicer than Lynx expected, and as they enter, Rick apologizes for Lynx having to come all the way out here. Lynx says it's fine since he didn't even run into any monsters along the way, and Rick explains that monsters never come anywhere near the castle, but that gets Lynx wondering why he had to wear armor if that's the case. Rick says it's for Lynx's protection, but not necessarily from monsters. They enter the mansion and Renet is there to greet Lynx, and Lynx returns the greeting while thanking her for her help earlier. Just then, Alice comes walking down the stairs and she's so excited to see Rick that she fires a massive lightning spell straight at Lynx. Now Lynx would be guaranteed to die if that lightning bolt actually hit him, but luckily Rick was there to swat him away, so the only damage done is a hole in the wall. Rick then scolds Alice for using magic in the castle, after he specifically told her not to, but Alice complains that Rick hasn't played with her for a while now, so she was getting bored. Since Alice doesn't seem to feel sorry for her actions at all, Renet steps in and says that as punishment for her reckless use of magic, the repair costs for that wall are going to be taken out of Alice's food budget. This finally gets Alice to apologize for what she did, and she promises to never use magic inside again, but Rick knows Alice is definitely going to do it again as soon as she gets bored, so he tells Lynx to go ahead while he plays with her. Lynx is told to make himself at home, but this place is so big that he doesn't have any idea where to even start with it. He looks out the window and notices Mazette casually working on his military-grade weapons, so he goes over to say hi. Rick had informed Mazette about Lynx coming over, so Mazette welcomes him. Lynx asks what he's working on, so Mazette explains that building things like these is an old hobby of his, and he named this bad boy Patricia. He offers to let Lynx test it out, so he shows him how to hold it and Lynx aims for the target. But as he pulls the trigger, he is shocked by the level of power Mazette managed to pack into this thing, and Mazette is just doing it for fun. After that, Lynx continues to explore the castle until he comes across Broston's room, and he is quite shocked to see an orc in there, so he leans in to get a better look. However, Broston spots him and invites Lynx to come in if he wants to, so Lynx accepts the invitation and enters Broston's room. He is amazed to see the number of books Broston has in his collection, so Broston explains that he enjoys being surrounded by books and collects them often. Although recently, he has been more focused on training Rick, so he hasn't been able to read all the new books in his collection. Hearing this, Lynx asks if Broston was the one who oversaw the majority of Rick's training, and after Broston confirms it, he asks if Lynx is interested in training as well. Lynx excitedly answers that he would love to receive a lesson from Broston, and since he has a motivated look in his eyes, Broston agrees to teach him. After Rick is done playing with Alice, he goes looking for Lynx so they can grab some drinks together. However, to his horror, he is informed by Mazette that he saw Lynx heading into the forest with Broston, and Rick knows exactly what training with Broston is like, so he's insanely worried about Lynx's safety. Meanwhile, Lynx is currently falling off the edge of a cliff with huge weights tied to his ankles, and as he goes over the edge, he is convinced that this is the day he dies, so he begins saying goodbye and apologizing to his daughters for not being able to make it home. But as he was plummeting to the ground, he thankfully lands on top of the belly of the boar Reinette was going to use to make dinner for everyone. After Lynx gets down, he sincerely thanks Reinette for saving his life, and from the weights he was wearing, Reinette can already tell that Broston was the one behind all this. Lynx confirms this and tells her that Broston told him to run down the cliff with weights attached to his feet, and before Lynx even had a chance to process the absurdity of his order, Broston had already pushed Rick off the edge of the cliff. Lynx really believed he was going to die for a second there, and Reinette says he's right to be worried about dying since Broston was the #1 cause of Rick's deaths during his training, and unfortunately, there's no escaping Broston once training has begun. So Lynx gets dragged off into the forest to continue his deadly training. By the end of the day, Lynx is still alive, but he's totally drained. Rick asks why Lynx would agree to train with Broston even after knowing what he put Rick through to train him, but Lynx didn't think it would be that bad since Broston said he would give Lynx some light training. But that's where Lynx went wrong because Rick already learned the hard way that you can never trust what the others say. Never trust Broston to go easy on you, never trust Alice to behave herself, and never trust Mazette to take his job seriously. The others don't think it's that big of a deal since they've always been this way, and Broston can always just bring Lynx back to life even if he dies, so he doesn't see a problem here. If anything, they say Rick is to blame for any trauma Lynx goes through since he is the one who invited him here in the first place. A little while later, once Lynx has recovered from his training, he and Rick sit down together and Reinette pours them a cup of tea while they wait for dinner. As she leaves, Lynx comments on how nice Reinette is, and on that note, he asks Rick how far his relationship with Reinette has gone. Rick tells him he doesn't have a romantic relationship with her. He's a boring man in his 30s and Reinette is 16, so he doesn't think it would work out between them. But from the way he sees Rick look at her, he can tell that Rick really likes Reinette, and age is just a number anyway, so there should be nothing stopping Rick from asking her out. In fact, Lynx is 20 years older than his wife, but the age gap never posed a problem in his marriage. Rick just needs to wait for the right moment to make his feelings known, and everything should work out for him and Reinette eventually. Later that night, Reinette is done making dinner for everyone, so they all gather in the dining room to eat. Lynx compliments Reinette on her stellar cooking skills, and everyone else seems to be enjoying the food as well, so they all ask Reinette to get them refills. Reinette is happy to oblige, so she gets up to go and get all the things everyone requested, and as she is leaving, Lynx leans over and tells Rick that this is the perfect chance to get some alone time with Reinette and further his relationship with her, so Rick decides to get up to help her. Once Rick is gone, Lynx wants to make some conversation with the others, so he asks them about Rick's inborn skill. Broston tells Lynx that Rick's skill is one that is activated by fulfilling certain conditions, so he isn't able to activate it at will. It would have been better if his skill was one that was always active or voluntarily activated, but even without it, Rick's power level is already S-rank level. But if his skill, Reckless Soul, were to activate, he would be able to surpass all of them easily. After Rick and Reinette return, Broston says he has something he wishes to ask Lynx. Since he works at Central, he wants to know if Lynx has heard anything about the magic stones known as the 6 Jewels. Lynx recognizes those as the ones from the Legends of Yamato, and they are necessary for the party to accomplish their goal of defeating Kaiser Alcipiade. Those jewels are used to open the door to the Source Spiral where Kaiser sleeps, and they only activate once every 200 years, but luckily, this is around the time when they should be giving off a lot of magical energy, so they want to know if Lynx has seen or heard anything about it. Lynx had thought the Legends of Yamato were just an urban legend, but if Rick and the others are talking about it so seriously, then the story must be true. He can't think of any information that would match the description of the jewels, but he can check the confidential information at the Central Agency to see if he finds anything. Broston says he is grateful for Lynx's help, and after that, Rick asks Lynx if he has any more relationship advice to give, since Rick's plan to help Reinette out didn't go so well since she's just too good at everything. On another day at the Adventurers Guild, we see a girl moping the floors, but she's dissatisfied with her current task since she's an adventurer now, so she should be allowed to go slay monsters or something. Just then, she hears some adventurers at the front desk asking for a quest, so she goes to check it out. Rick and the others are asking to take on a quest with a threat level of 82, but unfortunately, The guild master tells them that they can't take the quest. He is well aware that they are strong enough to handle the quest easily, but the rules say they need a party of 4 with at least 2 adventurers, A rank or above. That's easy enough to fix, so they ask the guild master to find some random person to join them so they can meet the quota for the quest. And the girl just so happens to be the closest random person here. So the guild master goes over to Ray, and since she has been saying she wanted to go on some real adventures lately, he offers to let her fill the spot on Orichalcum Fist scene for the day. Ray doesn't really understand what the big deal is, but since the team consists of an old man and a little girl, she thinks it's normal enough, so she'll just ignore the fact that Broston is a talking orc and act like this is a normal group of adventurers. She introduces herself and says she is willing to join their team. They head out on the quest, and along the way, Alice says she senses something up ahead, so Ray asks if they are looking for something. Rick explains that they got a tip from a friend that a special magic stone that they've been searching is somewhere around here, so that's what they came for. As soon as Ray hears Rick mention a magic stone, she starts wondering how much they could sell it for, and while it is probably incredibly valuable, they don't intend to sell it since it can be really dangerous in the wrong hands and can even attract monsters. Ray says she's not worried since she is strong enough to defeat any monsters that attack. She says is only F rank right now, but in no time she'll be all the way up to A rank. She asks Rick what his rank is, so Rick tells her that he just got promoted to E rank recently. And while Ray doesn't say anything out loud, she internally calls Rick an old loser for still being E rank at his age. A little while later, Alice spots a wyvern, which is exactly what they were hoping to find, and Ray starts freaking out since wyverns are insanely powerful, but Broston just walks up to the wyvern and bitch slaps it away. He intentionally chose not to kill it so it would call for backup, but that makes Ray freak out even more since a swarm of wyverns is basically a death sentence to an adventurer. Broston is getting sick of all her complaining, so he asks Rick to take Ray and go somewhere else for now, so Rick leads her out of the forest. Along the way, Ray begins talking about how crazy it was for Broston to intentionally attract the attention of all those wyverns, but a couple seconds later, wyvern corpses begin crashing to the ground as Broston and Alice start slaughtering them. Ray is dumbfounded by what she sees, and while she is stunned, she nearly gets taken out by a red wyvern, so Rick pulls her to safety. A red wyvern is so tough that even A-rank adventurers struggle to defeat one. So Ray thinks they need to get out of there since she's F rank and Rick is E rank. But Rick just walks up to the wyvern and blows its head clean off his body with one punch, leaving Ray stunned once more. By the next day, Ray is deep in thought over what happened to her yesterday, and the guildmaster is glad to see she made it out alive. He tells her that Orichalcum Fist is the strongest party in the continent, and it is made up of adventurers who are all S-rank level. The whole experience has motivated Ray to train hard until she can eventually get to S rank, so she hands her broom to the guild master so she can start training immediately. But sweeping the floors is kind of her job, so guild master is not happy. Meanwhile, after returning from the wyvern hunt, Rick and the others were able to retrieve one of the jewels from the wyvern's den. And with it, Mizet is able to use magic to pin the location of the next jewel they need to find, and it looks like it's located in Heractopia, a large city known for its colosseums and strong fighters. 400 years ago, in a land mostly comprised of desert, a king named Alexander Heractopia built a colosseum where strong fighters could gather and face each other in battle. The king himself also participated in battles, and over the years he became the undefeated champion, with 10,000 victories and no losses. The popularity of the Colosseum gave rise to the Kingdom of Heractopia, and now the King Alexander Heractopia is immortalized as the kingdom's founder. Broston wishes he could have gotten to spar with Alexander at least once before he died, but if that happened, the whole kingdom would likely be blown away in the process. In Heractopia, being a fighter is a popular profession, but while Broston would love to learn more about this place, he thinks it would be a good idea to start looking for the item they came here for. The others agree, so they all start looking around together, but whenever they try to ask someone for information, the person gets scared because of Broston and runs away. They aren't going to make any progress like this, so Rick suggests that they could go to Town Hall instead to see if they can find some useful info there. However, just as they are about to leave, they notice a girl being harassed by a guy she wants nothing to do with, so Rick is about to step in, but Broston cuts him off and walks up to the guy instead. The guy is at least brave enough to stand his ground, but he seriously messes up when he challenges Broston to a fight. Broston is always down for a good round of violence, so he walks into a dark alley, and as soon as they are out of sight, the distinct sound of a skull cracking is heard, and Broston walks back out with the guy's limp body. The guy managed to survive somehow, and having such a near-death experience seems to have knocked the scumbag right out of him, so he's now an upstanding citizen and introduces himself as Gold. The girl also introduces herself as Militia, and Broston says he has something he would like to ask both of them. He takes out the red jewel and asks if they have any idea if there is something like this in town. Gold says he has seen something similar before, but he doesn't remember where. Militia also recognizes the jewel, but she's having a hard time recalling where she has seen it before. Just then, a loud parade for this year's fighting tournament passes by, and both Militia and Gold are excited about it. There are apparently only 2 more months before the King of Fists tournament officially begins, but Renette doesn't know anything about it. Gold explains that it is a tournament to decide the champion of all fighters, and it's so popular that they get over 500,000 spectators each year. The parade is being led by the 5-time champion of the King of Fists tournament, Kerwin Erwolf, and he is quite popular for his strength, so everyone here adores him. While watching their idol go by in the parade, Militia and Gold take a look at his belt, and that's when they notice that Kerwin's champion belt has the jewel Rick and the others are looking for. Kerwin heads back to the gym where he trains after greeting all his fans, and once inside, he takes a seat to relax a little. The owner of the gym comes over to Kerwin and apologizes for making him do all these publicity stunts, but Kerwin understands that it is important to build up hype for the tournaments ahead of time. He also asks how Kerwin is feeling, and while he doesn't feel bad, he doesn't feel great either. Things have gotten pretty boring for him since he always wins the tournament without much of a challenge, so for once he would like to meet a worthy opponent. Just then, Rick and Renette walk in, and Kerwin can immediately tell that these guys are different from all the other fighters he has seen before. The gym owner tells him it's bad manners for them to come in here uninvited even if they are fans, so Rick apologizes for barging in here unannounced, but he clarifies that they aren't here because they are fans of Kerwin, they are actually adventurers who came here in search of a particular gem. Rick is about to explain the whole story behind the gem, but then Broston comes in and cuts things short. He isn't the kind of guy to waste time with a lot of words, so he tells Kerwin straight up that he wants that belt. The manager now thinks Broston and the others are thieves who came to steal the belt, but Broston clarifies that they didn't come to steal a belt. They are specifically after the jewel in the belt because it belonged to a former member of their party a long time ago, and they need it for something important, but of course, he will have a perfect replacement gem made so they can put that in the belt instead. The owner thinks Broston is lying, so he starts calling for someone from the gym to come over and kick these crazy people out. However, Kerwin tells him there's no need for that. He has a very unique nose so he can smell when someone is lying, and Broston doesn't give off the scent of a liar. But while he may believe that Broston's party is the original owner of the gem, he still can't just hand it over to him, because this belt is the pride of Heractopia. The only way Broston will be getting his hands on this belt is if he becomes the new champion of the tournament, and Broston thinks that's a reasonable condition, so he turns around to leave. Rick begins asking if Broston's seriously going to leave without the jewel, but Broston is fine with it since he just has to win the tournament to get what he wants. They all leave, and the owner starts complaining about how rude those people were, but if Kerwin has let the owner try and kick them out like he wanted to, they would have gotten into a fight that would have killed everyone in this gym. The owner breaks out in a cold sweat over Kerwin's statement. He knew that they didn't look like average people, but he never would have guessed they were that strong. Kerwin states that from how the maid carried herself, he can tell that she has a wide array of lethal skills. Then there's the normal-looking man, but while he seems unremarkable, Kerwin can tell that he has trained his body to an inhuman degree, so he isn't one to be messed with. Finally, there's Broston, and by every indication, he is the most interesting. Meanwhile, outside, Broston explains to Rick and Renette that he thinks they should all join the tournament as fighters so they can win the belt fair and square. In order to enter the tournament, one must first pass the preliminaries held in the east and west of the kingdom, after which you need to win another match among those who qualified from the preliminaries, and that's when you are finally allowed to participate in the tournament. Broston says you will apply through the eastern gate, while Rick and Renette can enter through the western gate, so they'll all be in different tournament brackets. Rick and Renette are fine with the plan, but they ask Broston if he will be really okay getting around town by himself, but there's no need to worry since Broston already got Gold to agree to guide him around town. In order to register for the preliminaries, Rick and Renette are going to need to pass a test first, which is a lot like the promotion exams at the Adventurers Guild. As Rick enters the arena for his test, he's informed that he will be required to fight a mock battle to gauge his strength. His opponent will be one of the newly recruited fighters from the previous batch. Rick asks if his opponent is going to be strong, so the examiner checks the forms and tells him that the girl he is going to be fighting has won every match up till now, but whether Rick wins or loses, he will still pass the exam as long as he meets certain criteria. All of a sudden, the doors swing wide open and a very familiar voice begins to introduce herself. She confidently declares that because of her speed, people have started calling her the Flash, so whoever is up against her next has better watch out. However, her confidence goes down the drain completely as soon as she recognizes Rick. Angelica asks why Rick is here, but he could easily ask her the same question. He's also a bit worried about me and Raster here since it would be awkward after what happened last time, but Angelica tells him that her siblings aren't here with her, so Rick doesn't have to worry. With that said, she knows how powerful Rick is, so it's terrible luck that she has to face him in a mock battle. Even if a loss won't really have any consequences, she has an undefeated streak going, so she would like to keep it going. To do this, she decides to go all out from the start against Rick in hopes of overwhelming him with her speed, but as she tries to attack, she falls flat on the ground. She thinks she must have tripped since she is so nervous, so she gets back up and prepares to dash at Rick again. However, the same thing happens, so she realizes that she isn't falling because she is nervous. She is falling because Rick is doing something. Rick looks down at Angelica and asks her what she thinks of the new skill he has been practicing over the last few months. After realizing how strong he had gotten, Rick didn't want to risk hurting the people around him if he ever got into a fight, so he developed the 8 secret arts of going easy, and right now he is using the first art, which is basically constant leg sweeps. This is really effective because leg sweeps demoralize and incapacitate opponents as they fail to get up, and it barely does any damage. Angelica thinks it's insulting, but Rick points out that she hasn't been hurt because of the leg sweeps. Even if Rick is only doing leg sweeps, he is doing them at a speed that Angelica can't keep track of, even with her exceptional speed. It would normally be impossible to pull something like that off, but after the stuff she has seen Rick do, she isn't surprised that he can manage it. She thinks the best course of action would be to keep her distance from Rick, but as she tries to back away, she still gets her legs squeaked again. She still isn't willing to give up yet, and Rick is impressed by her will to keep going, so he says he will fight her seriously from now on. But as soon as he said that, Angelica gave up because she's not stupid. Rick is a little disappointed that things ended so abruptly, but his victory means he is now recognized as a fighter and can compete in the preliminaries. However, before he can head over to register for the preliminaries, Angelica comes running up and asks him one more time why he had to come here. She starts crying because it's not fair how Rick pounds her into submission all the time. But with how she phrased it, Rick is worried that Reinette might misunderstand, so suggests they all get something to eat so they can talk things out. They later go to a restaurant, and it just so happens that Melicia's parents own the place, so she's happy to hook Rick and Reinette up with some freebies. Rick tells her he appreciates it, but before she leaves, she asks if Brosnan will be coming here as well because she kinda has a thing for him. Unfortunately, Rick tells her that Brosnan is registering on the eastern side of town, so they won't be seeing him for a while. Melicia is a bit disappointed, so she leaves, and once the three are alone, Angelica asks Rick why he decided to come here. Rick says he is thinking about winning the tournament, and Angelica can't believe he is talking about winning the tournament so casually. Rick then asks her why she came here since he didn't think a knight like her would be willing to give up on her sword and fight with her fist. Angelica says she has her reasons for wanting to be here, and Rick asks if she plans on entering the tournament, to which she answers yes. Since she will be participating, Rick feels motivated to give it his all in the tournament as well, but this surprises her since she thought Rick was planning to compete in next year's tournament. She tells him that in order to qualify for the preliminaries, you need to have won at least 40 matches against other random fighters, and it's a very exhausting process, so most people average about 10 matches per month. With that said, there's only a week left before the preliminaries start, so there's no way Rick will have enough time to fight all those matches without getting exhausted. But Rick tells her that he already requested 10 matches per day for the next 4 days. The next day, Rick heads to the arena to begin his series of matches, and his first opponent is a guy called Grit, but the coordinator warns Rick that Grit is rumored to be cheating by using a weapon, although they never managed to prove it. In the arena, Rick comes face to face with Grit, and the guy looks really shady, but Rick can't see any weapons, so he's sure it'll be fine. As the match is set to begin, Grit pulls out an impact stone he had hidden in his shoe. Impact stones increase the power of a punch dozens of times over, so as Grit punches Rick, the giant dust cloud is kicked up, but by the time things settle down, the only one injured is Grit, who now has 2 new elbows. Grit doesn't understand what went wrong since he was able to shatter boulders easily with the impact stone, but now that he has had his turn, Rick gets ready to attack using his secret art of going easy, so he throws a punch and misses intentionally so that the air force from the punch would knock him out instead, and this way, Grit won't suffer any fatal injuries. Everyone is left in shock at what they just witnessed, but with that, Rick's first match has come to an end, and it looks like the Tournament of Fists is going to be a real sight to behold this year. Rick and Reinette later go to watch one of Angelica's matches, and Angelica lives up to her title of the Flash by swiftly defeating her opponent after kicking him straight into a wall. After the match, Rick and Reinette congratulate her for successfully winning her 40th match, meaning she has officially met the requirements for to qualify for the preliminaries. Seeing her complete her matches motivates Rick even more to do well in all his matches, But Angelica still can't wrap her head around the fact that Rick wants to complete 40 matches in the span of 4 days. Rick still doesn't see what's so difficult about it. So Angelica points out that you are only allowed to register for 1 match per day at any given venue. And while there are more than 10 venues in Heractopia, some of them are really remote, even as far as 100 kilometers from any other venues, so traveling between venues in time for his matches should be practically impossible. However, Rick cuts off Angelica's explanation because he says he has a match over at the Green Hill venue soon. Angelica yells that there's no way he's going to make it there in time because that venue is over 30 kilometers away and even the fastest carriage won't be able to make it there in time. But Rick never said anything about taking a carriage. He's in a hurry here, so it's faster for him to just run. Angelica thinks that's a crazy idea, but as Rick takes a step and disappears into a dust cloud from his speed, she realizes that she doesn't deserve to be called the Flash anymore if Rick is this fast. While she's still coping with the loss of her identity, Reinette asks Angelica if she would like to go watch Rick's match, and sure, she definitely wants to, but even with her speed, there's no way Angelica could keep up with Rick. If that's the case, then Reinette offers to take her there instead, but Angelica is hesitant to agree since she has a bad feeling about this. However, before she can give a response, Reinette has already picked her up and begins jumping from roof to roof at high speed. Angelica pleads with Reinette to go back to the ground, but Reinette doesn't want to take the roads since they are annoyingly complicated. Angelica eventually made it to the arena to watch Rick's fight, but she was so busy barfing that she missed the whole thing. Rick says he messed up on that fight since he still needs a bit of practice with making his attacks non-lethal. But you will have to practice later because for now, he has to get to his next venue and runs off. Angelica doesn't want to go through the terror of being carried by Reinette again, so she tries to back out of it, but Reinette has already grabbed her and is hopping through town again. Rick continues to win his matches effortlessly all across town, and Angelica suffers severe motion sickness from being carried everywhere by Reinette. Eventually, the 4 days are up, and Rick has officially qualified for the preliminaries by winning all 40 of his matches, so the next step is the leagues. Angelica is really glad she isn't in the same bracket as Rick, so she won't have to fight him for now. Reinette asks Angelica if she was hoping to win the tournament, and yes, Angelica would have liked to win since she's participating anyway, but if Rick is in the tournament, then her chances of winning are basically zero. On top of that, Broston is also participating in the tournament, and while Angelica has never met him, Reinette mentions that he is the one that trained Rick, so Angelica knows Broston must be even more monstrous than Rick is. But even if winning is impossible for her, maybe she can still get that guy to leave her alone by participating. Reinette asks what guy she is referring to, but Angelica doesn't want to explain, so she changes the subject and asks Reinette where Rick went. Reinette tells her that Rick went on a light 600-kilometer jog, but Angelica is no longer surprised by the absurd things Rick does. She asks Reinette how she can stand accompanying Rick all the time, but it has never once bothered Reinette. In fact, she kind of enjoys it. Angelica points out that at some point people are going to start rumors that she and Rick are lovers. But again, Angelica wouldn't mind that one bit since she really does have feelings for Rick. Angelica is shocked by how bluntly Reinette just said that, but a moment later, a guy comes up to them and says he has a request for the two beautiful ladies. Angelica thinks the guy is hitting on them, but in reality, he is pleading with them because he is short-staffed and needs some part-time workers. Later that day, Rick gets back from his jog, and he is approached by a man named Snape, who is the chairman of the West League. Rick asks how Snape knows him, but it turns out that Rick has become pretty famous around here for being the fastest man to ever qualify in the West League. Snape shakes hands with Rick, and as he does, his guard comes out of the bar and informs him that Angelica isn't here. Snape is disappointed to hear this, so Rick asks him if he knows Angelica. Snape confirms that he and Angelica are quite close, but he is just a merchant who is on good terms with the Diremute family. Changing topics, Rick asks Snape when he retired from being a fighter, but Snape is shocked that Rick knows he used to be a fighter since he never mentioned it. Rick explains that when they shook hands, he could tell that Snape's hands are those of a trained fighter. Snape admits that he did once win a small tournament, and the cheers of the crowd were like nothing he has ever experienced before, but that was 20 years ago and he has long retired since then. So that was his first and last victory. He is really excited when it comes to fighting, and in fact, his company is sending a fighter to the tournament this year, but he has other business to attend to, so he is going to have to cut their conversation short. Snape bids farewell to Rick, but before he goes, he also asks Rick to tell Angelica he came looking for her, and that she shouldn't play around too much since Snape wants her to take good care of her body. Once Snape leaves, Rick heads inside and Militia comes over, asking him if everything is alright. She saw him outside talking with Snape, and while it's good that nothing happened, she wants Rick to be careful. He may look like a gentleman, but rumors are going around that Snape is part of the criminal underworld, and Rick is surprised to hear that since Snape is connected to Angelica's family. It was a total shock when Snape's company became the major sponsor for this year's tournament, and as the sponsor, he gets a free sponsor slot to send anyone he wishes to the tournament. Just then, Rick hears some guys in the bar talking about how pretty the bunny girls outside are, and as soon as they mention that there's a dark elf bunny girl, Rick has a feeling he is going to want to see this. We cut to the front at the West League Stadium where Angelica and Reinette are volunteering as the advertising bunny girls. Angelica is really getting into it, but she's not doing it because she wants to. She just couldn't bring herself to deny the man's request when he was so desperate. But Reinette says the only reason she is doing this is because Angelica agreed to do it too. The job's not too bad, but there are always going to be drunk idiots who don't know when to quit, and this guy seems to really enjoy harassing the bunny girls until they run away. But when he tries to grab Angelica's chest, first off, there's not much to grab, but he also receives a horrible beating from her. While she is still angrily stomping on his head, Rick walks up and he is shocked when he sees Angelica in the bunny outfit. Angelica is embarrassed and tries explaining that she is just doing this to help out a little, but Rick stops paying attention to her as soon as he spots Reinette, and you can literally see the sparks flying, but Angelica is just standing in the middle of it. Meanwhile, Kerwin's coach is reading the newspaper and he sees an article about Broston and how he completed all of his qualification matches in the span of 2 days. Kerwin comments that Rick seems pretty tame compared to the ogre, but he still managed to finish all of his matches in 4 days, so he is really excited for this year's fight. The coach thinks back to the time when he went to a rundown city in search of new talent. He walked into a bar and found Kerwin having taken down an entire gang who were after him. Back then, Kerwin was known as the hungry wolf of the slums, and he asked the coach if he was here to try and take him down. But on the contrary, the coach was here to offer him the opportunity a lifetime. He said he wanted to scout Kerwin as a fighter for Heractopia, and with his strength, he will be able to acquire anything he wants by winning fights. There are also going to be plenty of strong fighters there to keep him busy, and as soon as he heard that, Kerwin was convinced, and it has been a while since he has been this excited for a fight. The next day, the leagues are about to begin, and only one person from each block can advance to the tournament, so they are in for several fierce battles. The first fight of Block A is between Angelica and a fighter named Helen, and as the fight begins, Angelica seems to be straining herself a lot more than she usually would, which is out of character for her. She eventually wins her match by kicking Helen into the wall, but she is already starting to get winded. Next up is Rick's match, and his opponent begins charging up his special move, but Rick just chops him across the neck and knocks him out. The rest of the matches pretty much end the same way, with Angelica coming out on top after a struggle and Rick effortlessly annihilating the competition. So far, Angelica has been on a roll with her victories, but if she wants to guarantee that she can make it to the tournament, then she can't afford to lose even a single match. Rick encourages her to do her best, but as he is about to give her some advice about her next fight, she walks off before he can say anything. Angelica's next match begins and she is up against a tank, so while she is still faster than him, her attacks are a lot less effective. She tries to make up for this by incorporating magic into her attack, so she creates a water prison around him and fires a bolt of lightning into it, but the big guy is still standing after it all. He mocks Angelica for not being able to take him down and asks if she is running out of steam already. Angelica tries to dash in with Blink Step, but she has indeed run out of stamina, so the big guy is able to outpace her and Angelica gets knocked out because of it. After Angelica's match is over, she gets treated with healing magic at the infirmary, but as she leaves, Rick is waiting for her outside to see how she is doing. Angelica doesn't want to talk, but Rick points out that she was being too hasty in that fight. It's true that her opponent had amazing defenses, so it was a bad matchup for her from the start, but Angelica could have still won if she switched tactics instead of continuing to use moves that would drain her stamina. Angelica doesn't want to hear it, but Rick keeps following her because he can tell that there's something on her mind and he wants to hear her out if it will help. Angelica eventually caves in and says we'll tell Rick all about her situation. It all started when her parents died, leaving her and her siblings in charge of running the Diremood estate. Of course, at the time, they were all still children, so they quickly fell into financial ruin. However, their scheming grandpa went and made a deal with a man known as Snape in exchange for a significant amount of financial support, and in exchange, he agreed to have Angelica engaged to Snape as a way for Snape to have a connection to the nobility. After that, Angelica and her siblings did everything they could to restore the Diremood family so they wouldn't have to rely on Snape, but by then it was already too late to call off the engagement. That is a really complicated situation, but Rick still hasn't gotten over the fact that Angelica is engaged. In any case, Angelica tried to investigate Snape to see if she can find enough dirt on him to call off the engagement, but what she found instead was that Snape had become a sponsor for this tournament, and with him being the sponsor, he he is allowed to insert a fighter if his choosing into the tournament. Just then, they hear a commotion in the bar nearby, so they go over to check it out, and they find the guy that defeated Angelica arguing with a lizard man. He is telling the lizard man to let go of the waitress that he is holding by the neck, but the lizard man refuses, so Taylor tries to knock him out and save the woman. However, the lizard man is too powerful and eats that punch before knocking Taylor out instead. Geith then mocks Taylor for thinking he could win when he is so weak, and after that, he goes back to harassing the waitress. But Angelica runs up and yells for him to stop. She knows she stands no chance against Geith, but she can't just sit back and let him do whatever he wants. Geith is offended that another weakling would dare to stand in his way, so he's about to punch Angelica in the face, but Rick catches his arm and tells him to calm down. Geith is about to start a fight here, but Snape suddenly shows up and tells him to quiet down and leave. Geith does as he is told, and Snape apologizes for all the trouble he has caused. Geith is Snape's younger brother, and he has serious anger management issues, but there has been no one strong enough to put him in check lately, although he does calm down pretty quickly if Snape tells him to. After Snape leaves, Angelica explains that Snape put a lot of money into the engagement deal, so he became a sponsor of the tournament in order to recoup some of his money. And to do that, he plans to take advantage of the gambling ring surrounding the tournament and use his sponsor Slot Fighter to guarantee the results of the matches so he can win a lot of money. That's why Angelica entered in the first place, in order to take out Snape's fighter and force him to call off the engagement. But as much as she hates to admit it, she knows there is no way she can defeat Geith as she is now. Rick thinks about it for a second, and then he asks Angelica if she would like him to train her, but given the kind of training Rick went through, that sounds more like a death threat to her. Angelica ends up agreeing to the training, but before they go through with this, Rick warns her that his training is going to be so tough that it defies all logic. By now, Angelica has resolved to do whatever it takes to grow stronger, and Rick likes her determination, so he straps over 100 kilograms of weight to her body and warns her not to mess up her physical enhancement magic, otherwise she will die. Angelica asks him to explain what kind of training this is supposed to be, but Rick gives no such explanations and ties a rope to himself before taking off running. Angelica is being dragged behind him, and she's already wishing she didn't agree to this. She doesn't even know what this is supposed to be, so Rick explains that it's called baby bird running. It's basically just getting pulled by someone who is faster than you. So your body either learns how to move quickly, or you'll quickly end up dead. Rick tells Angelica that she is good when it comes to acceleration, but her other movements aren't stable, so this should help her improve on that. Angelica asks him if they can at least take a little break so she can mentally prepare herself, but Rick tells her that it is important to push beyond your limits, so they'll have to keep going for another 6 hours. By the end of those 6 hours, Angelica is barely alive and she can't believe her feet are still attached to her body, but even with the state she is in. Rick compliments her for doing really well for her first training session. Back when Rick had to do this with Reinette, he passed out almost immediately and got dragged across the floor. He died 3 times that day, but Angelica made it out relatively fine, so she's proud that she got through the training. Although that was only in the morning session, so after a 1-hour break, Rick will be back to get her so they can begin the afternoon training session. Angelica can't believe what she is hearing and tries to plead for a more lenient training schedule, but Rick doesn't listen to her and says he will be back in an hour. After 5 days of this hellish training, Angelica is sitting in a random bar in the middle of nowhere and trying to justify her actions. It's not like she is lazy for running away, she asked to be trained, but what Rick is doing to her is more like torture. So it is perfectly reasonable for her to make a tactical retreat far away from him for the sake of her mental health. There's no way Rick will be able to find her all the way out here, or at least that's what she thought, but Rick shows up right outside the window. He says he has been looking for her all over the kingdom, but Angelica still doesn't know how he found her so quickly since it has only been 15 minutes since she ran away. She expects Rick to scold her for abandoning her training, but Rick doesn't intend to do that at all. He understands the feeling of wanting to run away, and he can barely count the hundreds of times he tried to escape while he was training, not to mention the thousands of times he died. He has a flashback to a time when Broston had accidentally killed him, so Broston asks Alice to lend him some of her magic, and after she does, Broston revives Rick. With the extra magic Alice gave him, Broston said he could probably revive Rick another 2,000 times, so he wanted to get back to training immediately. Angelica is surprised Rick managed to make it through that kind of experience, and Rick definitely tried to quit a bunch of times, but Broston told him something that changed his mind. He was told that the regret of quitting would far outweigh the current suffering he was experiencing, and when Rick thought of it like that, the right choice became clear to him. But still, Broston told Rick that if he ever seriously wanted to quit, then he would be free to do so, and knowing that made the training a lot easier to bear. Angelica tells Rick that she has always hated the customs of nobles. She had been taught all the etiquette and manners of a noble, but she never understood why she needs 3 different sets of spoons for one meal. That is why she wants to contribute to her family, not as a noblewoman, but as the first ever special grade female knight. And to do that, she is willing to endure any amount of suffering. Rick is glad to hear it, so they head back outside so they can continue the training session, and he's been thinking about something lately. Angelica is a knight, so she would naturally fight better with a sword. However, Angelica reminds Rick that the rules of the tournament say fighters are only allowed to use their bodies to fight. Rick knows that, and that's why he suggests that Angelica should learn a technique that makes her hand as sharp as a blade. She didn't know such a technique actually existed, but this kind of thing isn't Rick's specialty, so he calls for Renette to help train Angelica. By the time Angelica's next match comes up, she straight up looks dead inside from all the training she had with Renette. Her fans don't know what caused the sudden change in her appearance, but her opponent is a big muscular dude, so her usual fighting style of repeatedly striking won't work here. However, through the torturous hours of training, Angelica has developed a new fighting style, and it's just for punching the guy with so much force that the match ends immediately and Angelica is declared the winner, and it's clear that the training really worked, but it takes a lot to calm her down afterwards. A while later, Angelica is agonizing over what happened because she can barely remember what she did during the match, but Rick tells her it doesn't matter since she won her match and has qualified for the tournament now. Just then, Alice and Mazette arrived at the bar and Rick greets them, asking if the tip they were following actually led them to one of the jewels, but unfortunately, it was a false rumor, so Mazette had been wasting his time. Mazette looks over and notices a cute girl nearby, so he tries to hit on her, but she already has a crush on someone, so she spins out of the way. And a moment later, her crush arrives as Gold announces Broston's return. They all sit down to eat together, and Mazette asks what Broston has been up to lately. Broston tells him that he and Rick are entering the tournament so they can win and claim one of the jewels as their prize. Alice says she wants to enter the tournament as well, but Rick knows she would destroy the entire kingdom if she did something like that. Broston calls over to Angelica since he heard that she is in the tournament as well, and she responds confirming it. She even asked Rick and Renette to train her, but they nearly killed her so many times. Rick tells her that the fact that she didn't actually die is proof that she has talent, but even so, she doesn't think there is enough time for her to get strong enough to win. Broston and Mazette tell her to have a little faith in her efforts because hard work will always yield good results. The day of the tournament is finally here, and the match pairings are finally made. With how things are set up, Rick is glad he won't have to fight Broston anytime soon, because if he did, he would just withdraw altogether. Angelica points out that the way the tournament brackets are arranged is totally rigged to favor Geith. With how it is set up, Geith won't have to face Broston or Kerwin until the final round, and it was probably done that way because Broston and Kerwin are major trouble for Geith if the plan is to have him fix the results of the matches. She assumes that Snape wants to impress the crowd with Geith's fights against a bunch of the weaker fighters, and once enough hype has been built up and people begin betting on Geith, Snape will place a bet against Geith and he will lose that round on purpose. To build a good amount of hype, Geith needs to look like he is barely trying so his opponents can't be too strong. That's why she wants to go up against him early on and ruin Geith's plan. Angelica's plan works out with the way the tournament brackets are organized, but Rick wonders what Angelica planned to do if she couldn't face Geith until the finals. To be honest, she hadn't even considered what to do if that happened, but it all worked out anyway, so there's no use thinking about it now. Geith is bored with this whole thing, and while Broston and Rick are heading to the stands, they run into Kerwin and congratulates them on making it to the tournament. Broston says he will be taking that belt from him, and Kerwin can't wait to finally have a good fight again. Back when the coach first recruited him, Kerwin was eager to have a good fight with some strong opponents, and though the coach's gym wasn't as popular at the time, he had some fighters who were able to make it to the semifinals of the tournament at the time. Kerwin excitedly gets in the ring and asks if it's okay for him to kill the Ganon, but the coach reminds him that killing is against the rules of the tournament. Weapons and armor are also forbidden, so the only thing you are allowed to fight with are your fists. Kerwin is okay with that and asked Ganon not to hold it against him if he got hurt, but by the time the fight was over, Kerwin was the one who was badly hurt. The coach wasn't surprised that Kerwin couldn't beat Ganon, but for someone who had never received any formal training, Kerwin was still pretty good. He deduced that with some good training and guidance, Kerwin could become one of the greatest fighters of Heractopia, and he was right as Kerwin began to devote himself to his training and became stronger with each defeat until he eventually stood as the champion of the Tournament of Fists. It has been 6 years since then, but Kerwin still has that same look of excitement on his face. The first round is about to begin, and Geith is facing a dude called Herman. As the match begins, Geith is still bored, but Herman is offended that Geith isn't taking this seriously, So he attempted to knock his jaw off. However, his attack does absolutely no damage to him whatsoever. Geith is getting annoyed, so he attempts to punch Herman, but he misses and strikes the floor instead. The resulting dust cloud is so massive that even Geith can't see a thing, so in his confusion, he accidentally strikes Herman and knocks him out of the ring. Geith is definitely powerful, and he achieved his goal of making people think he is unbeatable, but Rick finds him strange because even though Geith possesses all that power, he still moves like an amateur with no actual training. The rest of the matches go as expected, with Angelica, Rick, and Brosnan all winning their respective matches, so the final match of the day is between Kerwin and a random guy. Rick and Brosnan want to see what Kerwin is made of, so they watch attentively as Kerwin's opponent tries to attack him, but Kerwin punches the guy to the ground before he could finish the motion. In this case, it's not that Kerwin's reaction time was particularly fast, it was more like he knew what was going to happen before it happened. Kerwin has trained his nose to be able to sense the impulses of an opponent before they make their move. It's basically smelling into the future, but shockingly, he gets knocked down a moment later. But the thing is, it didn't look like he failed to react to the punch, he just let it happen. Kerwin lets himself get punched just to add a little bit of drama to the fight, but he gets back up and finishes the fight in one punch. The next day, the semifinals are being held, and Angelica is set to fight Geith in the next round, so she'll finally get to put her hard work to the test. Snape comes over to Rick to ask if he can sit there, and Rick has no objections, but he asks why Snape isn't using his designated seat as a sponsor. Snape says he just wants to watch this match really up close, since the people involved are his younger brother and his future bride. As Angelica is walking through the stadium corridor, she comes across Geith, and she confronts him, saying she will be his opponent today. Geith doesn't remember her at first, but he soon recognizes her as the girl Snape is getting married to. Snape asks him not to mess up Angelica's face too badly, so the wedding photos don't need to be edited. Angelica scoffs and says that she will show him the results of all her hard work, but Geith thinks hard work is utterly worthless. He hasn't trained a day in his life, yet he is still so much stronger than Angelica, and nothing she does will ever change the fact that she is a weakling. A little while later, the match begins and Angelica tries attacking Geith, but his shell is way too hard for her to do damage to it with her kicks. She backs away and decides to put her training to good use. She begins circulating her mana within her body, and as she dashes forward, she manages to make a small cut on Geith's body, so she still has a chance of winning. Snape is visibly shocked by this, since it should be impossible for even the sharpest swords to cut through Geith's armor, but Rick tells him that he shouldn't underestimate Angelica's capabilities. This is one of the secret techniques of body control that Renet taught Angelica, although it took a lot of hard work for Angelica to master it. At the start of the training session, Renet demonstrated the technique by using her hand to slice a boulder in half, and Angelica didn't know it was possible to do that much damage without using any magic. Rick told her that this is the technique he wanted her to learn, but Angelica didn't believe there was any chance she could learn such a strong skill. Renet assured her that it wouldn't be that hard since even Rick was able to learn it eventually. Although he still isn't as good as Renet, they tell her that the trick is to feel the air and swing through completely. And since they believe that she can do it, Angelica trained more than she ever has before until she was finally able to utilize the thread slash, although she had to make some adjustments for her body. She uses her magic to channel it into one powerful blow, and normally this would put too much strain on her body, but after all that training with Rick, she is able to handle it. With this technique, she can now consistently damage Geith, but that doesn't mean she is guaranteed to win against him, as Geith is still stronger than her. Geith punches the ground to create a dust cloud, and while Angelica's vision is obscured, he attempts to knock her out, but Angelica managed to lean back in time. That was a close one, but Angelica is confident that she won't fall for that move again, so she relentlessly darts around the arena and slashes Geith. Snape looks really frustrated, but it's not because he thinks Angelica might beat Geith, it's because he knows what Geith is going to do next. Geith punches the ground to create another smoke screen, but this time he isn't messing around anymore, so he appears behind Angelica and smacks her into the wall. He was originally going to take it easy on Angelica because Snape didn't want her to get hurt, but Angelica has gotten on his nerves, so he is done holding back. Angelica gets back up and tries using her flickering feet technique to get close to Geith and attack, but Geith simply uses his tail to knock her away mid-sentence. She tries using her technique again, but Geith has seen it so much that he is able to copy it perfectly and outspeed Angelica before knocking her into the wall again. Snape was worried something like this might happen, but there's no stopping Geith now. He explains that Geith is his adoptive brother, and they first met back when Snape was still a fighter and Geith was 8 years old. They were having a sparring match and he beat Snape's ass so bad that Snape had to take a look at himself, realize he just got manhandled by an 8-year-old, and retired from fighting altogether. Geith was gifted with the best possible genetics for combat, so even with no training, he far outclasses any normal fighters. Angelica may have thought Snape was rigging the matches, but in reality, Snape is just confident that Geith will win, so he placed a large bet on Geith's odds of winning the tournament. However, right now, Geith doesn't even care about the tournament anymore and is just beating Angelica up for the sake of it. He wants her to realize that all the effort she put into training is meaningless in the face of raw talent like him. He grabs Angelica and holds her up, asking if she has finally accepted her place as untalented trash, but Angelica still doesn't want to give up and throws the feeble punch with the last morsel of strength in her body. Geith throws Angelica into the wall again as her punch did nothing but infuriate him, so much so that he now intends to kill Angelica even though it's against the rules. Rick yells for him to stop because he has already won the match, but Geith keeps charging forward with murderous intent. Luckily, just before Angelica is killed, a boot comes flying out of nowhere and knocks Geith's claws out of the way. The boot belongs to Rick, and he doesn't get angry often, but this is the one time he feels nothing but rage. After the match, Rick heads backstage where Geith throws his boot at him and confronts Rick. He is pissed that Rick made him miss his kill shot, and he says he will make Rick pay for his insolent interference. However, Rick remains completely silent. This annoys Geith, so he tries to throw a kick at Rick, but the next moment, Rick appears behind Geith and begins putting his boot back on. He knows he could get revenge on Geith right now, but there would be no justice in that, so Rick says he will make Geith pay for what he has done by humiliating him when they fight in the tournament. He then starts walking away, and Geith can't wait to get his hands on Rick at the tournament tomorrow. The next match starts and Rick is a little worked up, so he forgets to hold back against his opponent and does this to him. In any case, his victory means he will be participating in the semifinals, so he goes to check on Angelica. The nurse in charge of Angelica's treatment tells him that due to her severe injuries, the treatment is going to take longer than usual, but there is no immediate risk to Angelica's life. Rick is glad to hear that she's okay, but he feels sorry for Angelica since she went so far to push through that hellish training just to have things end up like this. In other news, Brosnan and Kerwin won their matches as well, so the finalists for the semifinals tomorrow have been decided. The next day, Rick comes across Angelica in the halls, and he's happy to see that she's doing better since he asked Brosnan to personally heal her, but he reminds her that she still shouldn't push herself too hard. He doesn't want to bring up what happened yesterday, so he starts walking away, but before he leaves, Angelica speaks up and apologizes for not being good enough to meet his expectations. Rick went through all the trouble of training her even when he didn't gain anything from it, yet she still failed to achieve her goals, so maybe she isn't cut out to be a fighter after all. Rick tells her that she has nothing to apologize for because she worked really hard to train for the fight, and if anything, Rick is the one at fault here because he failed to adequately gauge Geith's true strength so he could prepare Angelica properly. He wants her to watch his match with Geith closely so he can show her the results that can be achieved with hard work. The time for Rick's battle finally comes and he is standing across from Geith, but surprisingly, Geith actually seems concerned about Angelica. He says he was thinking about apologizing to her later, and for a moment, Rick thinks Geith might have actually learned his lesson and feel bad about what he did. But then Geith says he only feels sorry for Angelica because she has to live the rest of her miserable life with the knowledge that she will never be good as him. Rick runs up to Geith to deliver the first blow of the match, and Geith just stands there waiting for Rick to do his worst because he believes there is no way someone like Rick could ever hurt him. However, as Rick clocks him across the face, Geith falls to his knees in shock. Rick mocks him for being knocked down by a single punch when he claims to be so much stronger than him. Geith gets back up and charges at Rick wildly, but Rick evades the punch and palm strikes the air straight out of Geith's lungs. Angelica is amazed that a basic attack was able to do damage to Geith, so she assumes it must be because of Rick's superhuman strength. However, Reenet corrects her and explains that Rick is barely using any strength at all. Rather, he is using the second technique of body control to damage Geith. The through-body attack is one that ignores all forms of armor and deals damage straight into the core of the body, so no matter how tough Geith is, he's going to feel a lot of pain. Rick tells Geith he can withdraw from the tournament if he wants, but Geith still believes he is superior in every way, so he unleashes his special Dragonid strengthening magic. With this boost, Geith is actually able to knock Rick back, but Rick catches himself and begins running around to evade Geith. Brosnan now realizes what Rick's game plan is, and from what he can see, Geith's strengthening magic uses a lot of magical energy. Geith never trained his mana capacity, but he was born with such massive mana reserves that it doesn't matter. Rick tries to attack again, but with Geith's new reinforced body, the technique now has no effect, so Geith slashes at Rick and kicks him away. Geith throws another punch at Rick, but this time he is starting to look like he is getting tired, while on the other hand, Rick doesn't have even a single scratch. Rick has been using one of the other techniques of body control called flowing strikes, and this technique allows him to disperse the damage from the attacks Gaeth has been delivering, so he is pretty much unharmed. Gaeth is enraged that Rick isn't taking this fight seriously, but Rick explains that he is actually fighting seriously. He is intentionally restricting himself to match Angelica's stats, and he intends to beat using nothing but Angelica's full strength. Gaeth declares that he will make Rick regret looking down on him and prepares an all-out attack, but because he is so tired, he is losing control of his magic, which allows Rick to easily punch through his defenses. Gaeth doesn't understand how he is losing to Rick when he is only using Angelica's level of strength, but he has never trained to the point of being tired before, so his body doesn't know how to handle it. Snape is amazed that Rick is actually winning and asks if Rick possesses even more talent than Gaeth, but all the others immediately tell him that Rick has almost negative levels of talent. All the strength he possesses is a result of pure hard work, which is something Gaeth could never understand. Being able to push yourself to the limit and keep going is true strength, and Gaeth does not have that. Gaeth tries to punch Rick once more, but Rick catches it and sends a wave of force through Gaeth's arm. He acknowledges that Gaeth is definitely a prodigy and definitely has the potential to be the strongest in the world, but he is still only at level 1 on his path to growth. The truly strong are those who have taken their talents and trained beyond human comprehension. He is sure Gaeth must have thought he was the strongest in the world, but that's only because he has never run into anyone who could actually beat him. Gaeth doesn't want to accept that he just can't beat Rick, so he decides to use his trump card and calls on his ancient dragon blood to transform. Now he's pretty much a dragon, and Rick is having trouble keeping up with his attacks again. Rick tries another through attack, but it does absolutely nothing to Gaeth's new form. He's gotten stronger, more durable, and his attacks are even faster than before, so he is getting pushed around easily. Rick is forced to admit that Gaeth's talents are actually too great for Angelica to overcome, as there's no way she could ever beat him with her current level of power, but that doesn't mean she can't do it eventually. With a little hellish training, Angelica will be able to outclass Gaeth's power, and Rick is going to give a demonstration of what that would look like. After 6 months of training, Angelica's speed would be so high that she could blitz Gaeth easily, and after 9 months, her strength could easily overpower him. And after a year of training, she would be too fast for Gaeth to even see. Angelica is nowhere near capable of any of this now, and Rick says it takes a certain level of craziness to endure such hellish training for a year just to beat someone's inborn talent. And Angelica crazy enough to go through with it. Rick knocks Gaeth to the floor and tells him that the only way he will be able to stay strong would be if he puts his ego aside and trains to hone his strength. But Gaeth is still in denial of the fact that hard work can truly beat talent, so he creates a smokescreen and makes one last desperate charge at Rick, showing that he has learnt nothing. Rick decides that it is time to end it, so as Gaeth approaches, he uses the thread slash technique and slices through Gaeth's chest, which knocks him down and makes Rick the winner of this match. Once Rick is declared the winner, the crowd goes wild for him, and Angelica thanks him for what he did. She promises that she will train hard and someday reach Rick's level of strength, and Rick is glad to hear that she is feeling motivated again. Angelica then looks over to Snape, and she was expecting him to be in a frenzy over Gaeth's loss, but he actually looks really calm. Snape tells her that it is indeed a painful loss, but at the same time, Gaeth was an arrogant bastard, so it feels kind of good for Snape to see him get beaten. He may not have won any bets today, but he's satisfied regardless. Angelica tries to rub it in his face that he no longer has the money to uphold the marriage contract, so he can't marry into a noble family anymore. And Snape admits that it's a real shame that he won't be able to marry Angelica anymore, but it was never about marrying into a noble family for him. He just genuinely liked Angelica, and that is surprising to her. The next fight of the day is Broston versus Kerwin, and Kerwin is really pumped for his fight. He can tell that Broston is insanely strong because he can't find a single opening in his defenses. So as the match starts, he unleashes a flurry of attacks on Broston and dodges when Broston counterattacks. The fight is just about to get serious, but all of a sudden, the wall into the stadium crumbles as Gaeth is going on a rampage. It looks like his dragonic transformation overwhelmed his brain and caused him to attack everything in his vicinity, specifically the audience members who were just minding their own business. All the chaos Gaeth is causing is interfering with Kerwin's match, so he gets ticked and yells at Gaeth for interrupting his match and harming the people. Gaeth then turns his attention towards Kerwin, but even when faced with Gaeth's full strength, Kerwin is able to stop his punch with one arm and punch Gaeth so hard that he is sent flying and passes out. Rick and the others are amazed because Gaeth's strength rivals that of a top A-rank adventurer, so for Kerwin to be able to one-shot Gaeth, he must possess strength on the level of an S-ranker. Kerwin is ready to continue his fight with Broston, but due to all the injuries Gaeth caused, the match ends up being postponed till tomorrow so they can treat the spectators and handle any lawsuits that come from this. Kerwin says he is disappointed that he will have to wait till tomorrow since he was really looking forward to their fight, but doesn't think he's telling the truth because he can sense some doubts within Kerwin's punches. Later, since there are no more matches scheduled for today, the group heads back to the restaurant to grab a bite to eat. However, Rick isn't with them, so Angelica asks what he's up to, and Renette explains that he went on a quick 700-kilometer jog, so he should be somewhere near the border by now. They cut to Rick as he arrives at the town border, but before he turns back, he notices a mountain over in the distance that reminds him a lot of Renette. A few moments later, he sees a small dust cloud come from that same mountain, so he gets curious and decides to go investigate it, and once he gets there, he finds Kerwin in the middle of a training session. Kerwin chose to come all the way out here specifically because no sane person would ever randomly pass by, but since Rick is here anyway, Kerwin decides to make good use of him as a sparring partner. Rick was surprised by Kerwin's sudden attack, but he decides to go along with it and fights back against him. However, Kerwin effortlessly dodges thanks to his foreseen ability. Rick tries throwing another punch, and the force behind it surprises Kerwin, but he is still quick enough to block it before it lands. It's impressive that Kerwin could react to and block a serious punch from Rick, but Rick finds it weird that Kerwin is fast enough to react to this, but he still somehow gets hit with attacks that are far slower. Kerwin admits that he hasn't been giving it his all in his fights, and since Rick is pretty strong as well, he gets the feeling that they may be able to understand one another. Kerwin has always been obsessed with fighting, but at some point in his training he got so strong that he no longer felt challenged by any of the fighters he went up against. It became boring for him to have to fight in the tournament because he could defeat all of his opponents in one punch, but he decided that he would keep doing it as long as it made the gym owner happy. Since he couldn't enjoy fighting anymore, his only source of fun was training to get stronger, so he put all of his efforts into that instead. One day, he overheard the gym owner talking with his account about how they had been losing viewership for the tournaments recently. People started getting bored of the fights once they realized that Kerwin would always win in one punch, and that's hurting ticket sales. The accountant suggested doing something to keep the fights interesting, but the owner didn't want to force Kerwin to lose fights on purpose just to keep the crowd invested. By the time the next match came, Kerwin had a lot on his mind since he didn't want to continue winning as it made the owner's business suffer. But while he was deep in thought, his match started and his opponent already threw a punch. However, it was taking 3 to 4 business days to arrive, so Kerwin could have dodged it if he wanted to. However, he chose to take the hit instead and lose on purpose to keep the crowd excited. Over time, he learned to adapt his strength as he fought in order to keep people guessing, so he can still win tournaments, but he hasn't been able to use his full strength in battle in a long time. Rick understands what Kerwin means, but since he's facing Broston tomorrow, Rick says he won't have to worry about needing to hold back. In fact, for his own good, Kerwin better not hold back if he wants to survive. Rick then runs off without saying another word, and Kerwin is a little confused about what he said. The next day, Broston and Kerwin's match is about to begin, and to make sure there are no more incidents, a magic barrier has been erected to ensure the safety of all the spectators. Kerwin begins the fight by throwing several punches at Broston, which are all effortlessly blocked. However, Kerwin then throws a special rolling punch which is enough to break through Broston's guard. Rick is shocked since breaking Broston's guard isn't a small feat. However, when Broston punches back, Kerwin is forced to retreat. He admits that Broston is definitely strong, and Broston acknowledges Kerwin's strength as well, even if he isn't using his full strength. Since Broston was able to figure out that Kerwin was holding back, Kerwin admits that he has been hiding his strength for the sake of keeping things interesting. He would like to face Broston at full power, but if he goes all out now, all the spectators will know that he has been lying about his strength. Broston says he understands, and Kerwin thinks he's a failure of a fighter for lying to all his fans for so long, but Broston doesn't see it that way at all. Kerwin only did what he did for the sake of his fans, and Broston can respect that, so he says he will fight in a way that matches the level of strength Kerwin usually uses. To do that, he's going to fight using only 2 fingers, and not move from the spot he's standing in. Kerwin is a bit confused, but he begins attacking again, and to his surprise, Broston is actually embarrassing him with just 2 fingers. He gets tossed on his back, forcing him to back away again, and he would really like to go all out against Broston, but he still feels the need to hold himself back so the people don't realize his true strength. Just then, the gym owner yells out to Kerwin and tells him to stop pretending that he's weaker than he really is. Kerwin says he is only doing this to help the owner's business, but the gym owner says he doesn't want him to fight like this, even if it's for his business. His dream has always been to train the world's strongest fighter, and he knows Kerwin's dream is to become the world's strongest fighter, so he shouldn't have to hold himself back. Kerwin gets the message, and since the owner is fine with the people knowing the truth, turns to Broston and apologizes for holding back for so long, but he's ready to fight at full strength now. He charges at Broston and throws a punch that creates a massive shockwave, and it's so powerful that Broston ends up having to use 5 fingers to block it. Kerwin continues laying on the punches, but then he switches it up by using 2 roll fang punches to force Brosnan to block, and while his arms are up, Kerwin goes for a kick straight to the gut. However, Brosnan doesn't even budge and grabs Kerwin's leg and then throws him across the arena. Kerwin manages to break his fall by using the steel body technique, but the crowd is starting to realize that he's a lot stronger than he was a second ago, so he must have been holding back this whole time, and they begin to murmur amongst themselves about how he deceived them. Kerwin hears all the bad things they are saying about him, but it's already too late to go back to how things were before, so he's just going to focus on throwing everything he's got at Brosnan. He begins chanting a 5th nature fire spell and casts a hell flame wave in Brosnan's direction. Everyone is surprised by this, since beastmen like him are usually terrible at magic, so the fact that he can cast such an advanced spell speaks volumes to the amount of training he must have undergone. His power qualifies as that of a true genius on the level of Brosnan and the others, but Brosnan nonchalantly kicks him a rock and uses it to block the flames. Kerwin then uses Blink Step to get close to Brosnan, and as soon as he is within range, he casts a 7th nature spell to bind Brosnan in place and then proceeds to cast an 8th nature meteor spell. The others in Rick's party are pretty impressed with what Kerwin has done so far, but Rick is really worried because Kerwin is way stronger than he thought he would be, so at this rate, Brosnan is going to stop holding back against him. As the meteor is about to hit, Brosnan commends Kerwin on his strength and then proceeds to one-shot the meteor out of existence. Once the dust has settled, Brosnan tells Kerwin that he has felt his conviction to fight with everything he has, so as a display of respect, Brosnan promises to stop holding back as well and gives Kerwin a quarter thumbs up. The quarter thumbs up is a gesture done among the orcs when there is a dispute, and it basically means that respectfully, someone is going to catch a fade. As Brosnan begins walking towards Kerwin, he gets an instinctive feeling that he is about to get his ass beat with efficiency, so as Brosnan throws a punch, Kerwin barely manages to evade a direct hit, but the pressure from the punch is still enough to send him flying. Kerwin gets back up and tries throwing all the high-level magic he can at Brosnan, but doesn't even make Brosnan blink. He then dashes forward and lands a blow in Kerwin's abdomen, sending him flying backwards. The only reason Kerwin managed to survive was because he layered all sorts of defensive techniques to defend himself, but that punch would have killed a regular fighter. Kerwin is having trouble getting back up, and he contemplates just giving up since there's no way he can win against Brosnan, but his fighting spirit won't allow him to quit just because he is faced with a strong opponent. Even if he is out of mana, he still has the stamina to keep going. However, after punching Brosnan for a while, his stamina runs out as well. He is really out of juice this time, and he finds it hard to believe that someone as strong as Brosnan actually exists in this world. But just as he is about to give up, he hears the crowd begin to cheer for him. After seeing him fight with such conviction, they don't care if he was holding back before. What they want to see now is Kerwin doing his best to win no matter what. With the support of the crowd behind him, Kerwin gets back up and puts every ounce of strength he has left into a single punch. He doesn't have mana or stamina left, but his fighting spirit propels him forward to deliver a punch with all of his techniques combined, and the power he unleashes is far greater than anything he has done so far, yet Brosnan still stands unharmed by the end. He praises Kerwin for such a splendid display of fighting spirit and asks if he has unleashed everything he has in him. Kerwin stares at the ground in defeat because even his most powerful attack wasn't able to phase Brosnan. But then he notices that he actually managed to push Brosnan backwards with his attack. So he is satisfied with the results of this match and says he has no regrets. So Brosnan punches him and Kerwin falls to the ground unconscious. But even so, he's still got a smile on his face. After Brosnan's victory, he heads backstage where he is congratulated by Rick and Angelica. Since Brosnan is the one moving on to the finals, their party is now guaranteed to get the jewel no matter the outcome. So Rick plans to just withdraw from the final match since he wants nothing to do with Brosnan's fists, but Brosnan is actually looking forward to fighting Rick. So he tells him that he's not allowed to withdraw from the match. Brosnan then walks off, and Rick almost immediately starts losing hair out of fear of the fact that he will have to fight Brosnan. A little while later, Kerwin has just been treated and he is reading the newspaper article about his fight. The article says there are people who are angry now that they realize Kerwin has been holding back as the champion all this time. So Kerwin thinks his time as a role model is up. But judging by the fact that the kids outside still idolize him, the owner doesn't think he has to worry about the public hating him for what he did. More importantly, he had no idea Kerwin was capable of unleashing an attack as powerful as what he used against Brosnan, and to be honest, neither did Kerwin. He was just so focused on fighting that he came up with it on the spot, but in the end, he still lost the fight. The owner doesn't think it's that big of a deal that Kerwin lost, since it just means he has to train so he is strong enough to win the next fight. Kerwin appreciates the owner looking out for him so much, but he wonders why he is always so considerate towards him, so the owner explains that he thinks of Kerwin as a son, so he would do anything for him. Just then, Broston walks into the room and he realizes he interrupted a touching moment, but he's already here, so he sits down and asks Kerwin how he's doing. Kerwin tells him that most of the bones in his body are broken, so Broston offers to heal him, but Kerwin refuses, since this is the first time he has felt pain like this in a long time, and he wants to savor it a little. Rick had told him that he wouldn't need to worry about holding back against Broston, and now that he has lost, he is really looking forward to Broston and Rick's fight in the finals. At the same time, Snape pulls up to Rick's inn to pay him a visit, but he is surprised to find that Rick has locked himself in his room and Angelica is trying to convince him to come out. He is refusing to leave because he knows he will die if he faces Broston, and Snape can understand his fears, but everyone is looking forward to seeing him go up against Broston, so he would really appreciate it if Rick came out. Rick tells him that he's not participating in that fight no matter what because his life is more important to him than the tournament spectators, and if that's how he feels, there's nothing that Snape can do to convince him. But before he leaves, he uses his showman voice to talk about all the hard work and money that was put into this tournament, and how it will all go to waste if Rick backs out of the finals. As Snape walks away, Rick feels pretty guilty for letting everyone down, and Angelica tries to convince him to come out by telling him it's fine if he dies since he can just be brought back to life. And technically, she's right, but she doesn't know how bad it feels like to die, so she has no right to telling him to go face certain death. Rick tells her she wouldn't understand how scary it is to fight Broston, and Angelica finally gives up on trying to convince him, but she says she has lost respect for him as a teacher. Once she leaves, Mazette asks Rick if he remembers how Broston had a training plan ready on the first day he joined the party. Rick hadn't really thought about it, but it really was strange that he just had that pre-made. So Mazette explains that the training plan was one Broston developed a long time ago in order to train someone to fight on equal footing with him. Orcs have a culture that revolves around fighting, and it's through their fists that they are able to relate with others. However, since Broston is so strong, he has never been able to have a real fistfight without straight up killing his opponent. That's why he dreams of one day fighting someone of equal strength. Rick is free to withdraw from the tournament if he really wants to, but Mazette reminds him that Broston is really looking forward to it, so it would be nice if Rick could give him a good fight. Rick has a flashback to the day Reinette first introduced him to Broston, and immediately after shaking his hand, Broston could immediately tell that Rick had no training in martial arts, and he had the lowest amount of mana possible. Rick was surprised that Broston could learn that much from just a handshake, but Broston went on to tell him that he lacked the qualifications to be an adventurer with his current strength. However, that doesn't mean it's impossible to accomplish. He just wanted to warn Rick that he would need to train over 100 times harder in order to compensate for his lack of ability. Back to the present, Angelica is still pissed that Rick is so scared of fighting Broston and calls him pathetic. Mazette is disappointed as well, but he can understand why Rick doesn't want to do it because no sane human would ever willingly train with Broston, let alone fight him. Angelica asks if Broston's training routine was really that bad, so Mazette tells her that it was absolute hell for Rick, and it's a miracle that he didn't lose his mind after enduring so much pain, although he did go crazy a couple of times. Angelica is starting to understand how rough Rick had it since he was put through such grueling training and he doesn't even have the skill. However, Alice interrupts her and informs Angelica that Rick actually does have a skill, which surprises her a lot since she has never seen him use any kind of skill before. Mazette explains that the conditions to activate the skill are difficult to meet, and the skill takes a massive toll on Rick's body, so Broston forbade Rick from using it since he can't control it. Later that evening, Reinette goes to see Rick, and he asks her if she thinks he is pathetic for avoiding his fight with Broston. She assures him that she doesn't think he is pathetic, and she understands why he doesn't want to do it, but with that said, she would like him even more than she already does if he finds the courage to face Broston even though he doesn't have to. The next day, the tournament is about to begin, and the excitement is high in the crowd. The announcer begins listing off the prizes that will be awarded to the winner of the match, including a lot of money, precious stones, and tickets for a couple's trip to a hot spring. Reinette and Angelica go to check on Rick to see how he's doing, and Angelica asks if he is okay, to which Rick says he is totally fine, but his face shows that he is still completely terrified. That's when Reinette walks up to him and says she will personally give him a reward if he does well against Broston, and from that moment forward, Rick was locked in. Rick heads out to face Broston, and he tells him that he will give this fight everything he's got. So as the match begins, Rick charges at Broston to attack faster than the eye can see, and by the time he is done, he has successfully inflicted a wound on Broston and made him bleed. Broston is really impressed with Rick's strength, but Snape wasn't able to follow what just happened at all. Annette explains that in that fraction of a second, Rick charged towards Broston, and after nearly a dozen attacks and blocks, he managed to outpace Broston and use Thread Slash to cut Broston on his arm. Rick charges back in, and with the same amount of speed, he throws a punch at Broston, but it gets blocked, so he repeatedly strikes until he is forced to back away. Even then, he jumps off the arena walls and attempts to heel kick Broston into the ground. Broston once again defends himself and tries to throw a punch at Rick, but Rick ducks under it and pulls off another Thread Slash, cutting into Broston's stomach. Because she has been trained by Rick, Angelica is able to understand just how much effort it takes to achieve Rick and Broston's level of strength. But Rick seems really motivated for someone who was terrified a moment ago, so Angelica asks what Renette said to him that made him change his mind so quickly. Renette tells Angelica that she just told Rick that she would go on the couple's hot spring trip with him if he wins the fight, and that's apparently more important to Rick than his life, so he's going to do whatever it takes to win. Angelica is flustered because a couple's trip means Rick and Renette will spend the night together, and Renette is perfectly fine with that, so Angelica decides to just focus on the match for now. Since Rick has been earnestly fighting since the match began, Broston decides to fight at full strength as well, so he moves his arm back and prepares to throw a punch, and it's so powerful that Rick is forced to jump out of the way. That singular punch was more powerful than level 5 magic, and Rick is reminded why he was so scared to face Broston in the first place. But he doesn't have any time to rethink his decisions as Broston throws several more punches at him all at once. Rick does his best to evade them all, but while he was distracted by the punches, Broston snuck up behind him and is about to land a clean punch on Rick. But just before Rick got hit, he activated his air cushion spell to redirect Broston's punch away from him. It's already impressive enough that Rick was able to block Broston's punch with a level 1 spell, but it's even more impressive that he cast the spell without pause to gather his magic or say an incantation. What Rick just did was instant spell casting, and Broston finds it amazing that Rick can do it since even he can't completely cast a spell with no incantation like that. Rick says he only learned how to do it thanks to the training he received from Alice and Mazette. Alice and Mazette confirm that Rick worked really hard to learn how to do it, and he may have accidentally gotten evaporated once while trying to master it, but it was all worth it in the end. Rick begins dashing towards Broston again, so Broston tries creating a shockwave to stop him, but Rick just circles around and closes in to land a flowing strike. However, Broston blocks it and counters with a punch of his own, so Rick is sent flying backwards. But that's not enough to stop him as he rebounds off some rubbles and charges at Broston again from the front. The spectators think that was a bad decision since Broston now has plenty of time to counterattack, but as Broston throws a hurricane punch, Rick jumps into the air to avoid it. He may have successfully evaded the first punch, but now that he's stuck in the air, he has no way of dodging Broston's punches anymore. However, as Broston throws another punch at him, he uses an air cushion to punch himself out of the way and then launches an air shot at Broston. But once the dust settles, Broston is still mostly unharmed. Before the fight continues, Broston speaks up and compliments Rick for how strong he has grown in the 2 years that they've known each other. The training Broston put Rick through was really effective, but it was all thanks to Rick's strength and mental fortitude that he managed to complete the regimen, and he is proud of him for that. Broston never gives empty compliments, so Rick knows he genuinely means what he said, but that was more like something a master would say to a student, and Rick knows Broston wants to have a fight with someone equal to him. He tells Broston that Mazette and Alice told him about his dream to fight an equal opponent, and Broston is a bit embarrassed, but he tells Rick that Alice and Mazette were exaggerating. He does want to have a good fight on equal terms, but he wouldn't go so far as to say it's a dream. Be that as it may, Rick wants to show his gratitude for all the passion Broston put into training him, so he says he will fight Broston with the utmost respect so he can have the fight he has always wanted. Broston smiles and says it is fortunate that he got to meet Rick, and since Rick is already a member of their party, he thinks it is time to tell him about the history of Orichalcum Fist. 46 years ago, when Broston was still just 5 years old, it became apparent to him that he was different from the other orcs around him. Not only was he stronger, he was also much smarter than them, so he could never truly relate to his brethren. To fix this, he tried teaching them things like how to make a fire or how to build a house, and through his efforts, he successfully advanced his orc civilization. But as a result, the other orcs soon began treating him like a god, so he was even more isolated thanks to his new status. One day, during a particularly heavy storm, Broston just happened to be away from his pack for a while, and in the time he was gone, every single one of them died in an accident caused by the storm. Broston was left speechless once he saw the aftermath, but not because he was unable to save his people. It was because he felt nothing even though his entire family lay dead at his feet. And that was when he realized that he was truly alone in the world. Later on, Brosnan was reading a book by the fire after having killed a wyvern, but all of a sudden, a man runs out of the bushes and tries to attack him. Brosnan is able to jump out of the way easily, and this surprises the man since orcs usually aren't so mobile. On top of that, he notices that Brosnan was reading a book and even killed the wyvern that was terrorizing the local village. The man is out here because he accepted a quest to exterminate the orcs that live in these woods, but Brosnan seems like a calm and reasonable orc, so he apologizes for the sudden attack. Brosnan says it's fine since he's used to humans attacking him, and the man finds Brosnan interesting, so he wants to have his seat with him and chat. After a long talk, the man now knows Brosnan's life story and how he's struggling with loneliness due to his outstanding capabilities. More than anything, Brosnan wants to be able to have a fight with someone who is just as strong as him, but he knows a dream like that is never going to come true. The man understands the feeling since there's a dream of his that he hasn't been able to make come true yet, and Brosnan is curious, so the man elaborates. He says he once fought alongside a hero named Yamato, although in this day and age he was more like a legend. Brosnan had actually read the book about the legends of Yamato a while ago, but the story is said to have taken place 200 years ago. The man is glad to hear Brosnan has read the book because it turns out that he's the one who wrote it in the first place, and everything described about the adventures of Yamato and his party is 100% true. That means the dream the man was talking about earlier involves defeating Kaiser Alcipiade, and that's quite the challenging goal, but it might bring Brosnan a step closer to meeting someone as strong as him. So he decides that he will make it his mission to defeat Kaiser Alcipiade as well. With that, the two formed the Orichalcum Fist Party, and as time went on, strong people began to join just as Brosnan had hoped. Each of them had their own particular strengths, but what Brosnan sought was a person he could have a good old-fashioned fistfight with, and none of them could do that for him. That's what drove him to develop a training plan to help them achieve the required level of strength. But Mazet took one look at it and told Brosnan that there's no one on Earth who could survive a training routine like that. Brosnan realized Mazet was right, so he gave up on his dream of having an equal fight, but right now, a man who can rival his strength is standing before him, and he couldn't be happier. Brosnan apologizes for interrupting their fight with his long story, but Rick starts reflecting on all the time he spent training with Brosnan. What Brosnan really wants is a fist fight, but so far, Rick has been fighting using thread slashes and air shot magic. He recalls what Brosnan told him about the quarter thumbs up tradition among orcs, and how it means you will abandon all attempts at defense or evasion to focus solely on trading blows. And though Rick may regret this later, he extends his hand to give Brosnan the quarter thumbs up. Brosnan is shocked when he sees this, and internally Rick is apologizing to both himself and Reinette because there's no chance he's going to win, so he won't be able to go to the hot spring with Reinette. Reinette doesn't seem to mind though, since she finds it sweet that Rick wants to make Brosnan's dream come true. Brosnan returns the quarter thumbs up, and both he and Rick throw full force punches at each other's faces. The force of their fight is so intense that it is starting to destroy the barrier around the arena, and it'd be terrible for everyone here if that happened. So Mazet asks Alice to help him out with a little bit of her magic. Alice happily agrees to give him a boost while he casts his spell, and once he is done, everyone in the arena has been teleported away so they don't get caught up in the chaos that is about to unfold. Although Mazet left Kerwin here since he is strong enough to handle any fallout, Kerwin runs over and asks what happened, so Mazet explains that he just sent all the people outside so Rick and Brosnan won't have to worry about causing fatalities. Soon after, the barrier around the arena shatters, and the force from Rick and Brosnan's punches have started creating mini explosions. In terms of number, Rick has landed more punches, but in terms of power, Brosnan's punches are several levels stronger than Rick's are, and it's starting to show since Rick is suffering a lot more damage than Brosnan is. Rick lands another punch, but immediately after he gets knocked back by a punch from Brosnan, and he does a backflip into a faceplant because of it. As he struggles to get back to his feet, Rick thinks back to his training and he refuses to let this fight end like this. He charges at Brosnan again with a punch, and Brosnan counters with a punch of his own, so the fight continues. They both connect with each other's faces, and Brosnan is starting to really enjoy this, so he punches Rick into the wall and accidentally destroyed a section of the stadium. It looks like Rick is down for the count after that one, and he can barely find the strength to move anymore. He did pretty well considering the fact that he was up against Brosnan, so he believes he can go home and rest now since Brosnan is probably satisfied. However, as he looks over at Brosnan, he looks like he wants to keep going. However, Rick's body is so badly injured that he can only manage to move a finger. Angelica thinks there's no way Rick can keep going after suffering an injury like that, But the others tell her that Rick isn't done yet because they've seen him in action before and he has a lot more left in the tank. For Brosnan, this is just a fist fight, and Rick knows he isn't strong enough yet to call himself an equal. But that just means he has to pour out everything he's got to show his gratitude to Brosnan. Rick clenches his fists and a red aura envelops his body as he activates his inborn skill. Brosnan is absolutely shocked since he never expected Rick to be able to use it, and it turns out that it was a little secret among the other members of the party. They helped give Rick special training without telling Brosnan, so now Rick is able to control his ability to an extent, and he knows what the conditions to activate it are. The activation condition is for Rick to be ready to exceed his limits against an opponent that is far stronger than him, and the energy used to activate it isn't magic or physical strength. It's the power of his will. From this moment onwards, Rick is truly an equal to Brosnan, so things are going to get a lot more interesting. Rick charges at Brosnan and delivers with a punch several times more powerful than before, and Brosnan counters again, but this time Rick isn't blown away and continues trading blows with him. As Brosnan is fighting, he realizes that he has been looking at things the wrong way this entire time. He thought having a fight with someone on his level would make him feel less lonely, but in truth, Brosnan hasn't been alone for a long time. He realizes now that he has friends who are willing to go a long way just to make him happy, and that means a lot to him. As the fight drags in, both Brosnan and Rick are beginning to run out of energy, so their fatigue is taking a toll on them. The next hit is going to be a deciding factor of this fight, so Brosnan and Rick both prepare every ounce of power they have and charge at each other before delivering one final headbutt. The aftermath of the fight is visible for miles, and once the dust has finally settled on the arena, both Rick and Brosnan are still on their feet. Although they are bloodied and bruised, Rick laughs a little and compliments Brosnan on being truly incredible, because even after throwing everything he has at him, Rick still couldn't bring him down. Rick then falls to the ground, but Brosnan tells him that he didn't lose since the only reason the fight ended like this was because Rick chose to honor Brosnan's dream of an equal fist fight, so he believes that if anyone is being declared the victor, then it would be Rick, and soon after, Brosnan collapses from exhaustion as well. A while later, Rick wakes up in the hospital and finds the champion's belt on his chest, with Rionette sitting beside him. Rick has been asleep for 3 days, so the others were starting to get worried he might not wake up. But then again, the last time he used his skill, he was asleep for a full week, so his training must have been really effective. Rick is glad he's alright, but he wonders why he has the champion's belt since he clearly remembers going down before Brosnan at the end of their fight. So that means Brosnan won. That may be true, but Brosnan says he thinks Rick was the true victor of that match, so he wants him to have the belt. Rick is happy to be acknowledged by Brosnan, but the fact of the matter is that Brosnan is like a Dark Souls boss, so he could have easily dropped a heal spell on himself and kept going with 2 more health bars. He may have held his ground against Brosnan during their fight, but if he weren't limited to just his fists, Rick knows he would have stood no chance. Brosnan reassures Rick that he is indeed strong, and he also thanks the others for everything they did to train Rick. They'd all try to deny any involvement, but Brosnan knows they did this for him. However, Rick on the other hand had no idea that this was their intention, so he is pretty surprised. Now that they got what they came here for, Brosnan takes the jewel out of the belt and asks Rionette to bring over the jewel that she made to replace the real one. As a finishing touch, Alice uses some of her magic to charge up the jewel in order to make it even harder to tell that it's fake, and Angelica is just going to pretend she didn't see any of this. Just then, Rick remembers something he was curious about, so he asks Brosnan about Reinhard, the man he met in his flashback. If Reinhard is the same guy from the 200-year-old legend, Rick is curious about how he's still alive after all this time. Brosnan doesn't know Reinhard's exact age, but he does know that Reinhard's inborn skill is what keeps him from aging too much. It's been a couple of years since Brosnan last saw Reinhard, so Rick wonders if Reinhard is on some kind of important mission. But in reality, he's just running away from his publisher because he is late on the deadline for one of his books. Later that night, Snake meets with Kerwin to tell him that both Rick and Brosnan have refused to become the new champions, and they've returned the belt, so Kerwin is the next in line to receive the title. However, Kerwin really doesn't like the idea of becoming a champion again, just because of some technicality. The next morning, everyone is getting ready to head home, and Rick accidentally packed a little too much food, so they bought a carriage to transport it all. Alice is sad that Angelica has to leave, but she promises that she will come to visit, especially since she wants Brosnan to train her. Rick is shocked after hearing that Angelica wants to train under Brosnan and asks if she wants to die. But by now, Angelica is well aware that she is going to have to die a few times if she wants to get stronger, and she's prepared to do whatever it takes. She intends to catch up to Rick someday and even surpass him, and Rick is excited to see how strong she will become by the next time they meet. Angelica asks if Rick intends to run back home, and he does, but it's almost 3,000 kilometers away, and Angelica doesn't believe he can make it that far. Rick says he ran when he came here in the first place, and it only took him 3 days, but even if that's the case, Angelica points out that the goods he bought are going to take several months to cross that distance by horse, so all the food will have gone bad by then. However, Alice tells her that it's not going to be a problem with a little magic, and Mizette then hits the horse with a dose of steroids magic, so that thing's going to be traveling faster than a rocket now. With everything set, Rick is about to get going, but Renette stops him and asks when they are going to go on their hot spring trip since they still haven't decided on a date. Rick is flustered, but he says he didn't win the match, so he can't accept such a wonderful reward even though he wants to. Mizette understands Rick's thought process since his fight with Broston was basically a tie, so he proposes a race back to the castle, and if Rick wins, he gets to go on the hot spring date with Renette, but if he loses, he has to do 100 times the training. Rick doesn't like the sound of that and tries to reduce the stakes to 10 times the training. But before he finishes speaking, Mizette and Broston have already begun running, and Rick follows them soon after because he wants to take Renette to the hot spring, and he really doesn't want to have to do 100 times the training. This was the final episode. Subscribe for more anime recaps.